Clara Bennett's trembling hands gripped the worn contract as the mountain stranger's cold eyes bore into hers. Outside, the sheriff waited to seize her dying father's cabin, the only home she'd ever known. Luke Grayson's offer was simple: become his wife tonight or watch her family destroyed by dawn. She had 30 seconds to decide, and the pen felt like a loaded gun in her palm. One signature would save everything she loved, but cost her a future she couldn't even imagine. If you want to know whether Clara escaped her fate or walked straight into something far more dangerous, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. The December wind cut through Red Hollow like a blade, carrying the smell of wood smoke and desperation. Clara stood at the window of the cabin's main room, watching frozen dust devils dance down the rutted street. Her father's labored breathing rattled behind her, each exhale a reminder that time was running out in more ways than one. Clara. His voice was barely a whisper. She turned from the window, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Thomas Bennett looked smaller each day, his frame hollowed out by the sickness that had taken root in his lungs last spring. The medicine from Denver had cost nearly everything they had, and it hadn't helped. Not really. I'm here, Pa. You shouldn't be. He tried to sit up, failed, and settled back against the thin pillows. You should be with the Mortimer girls, planning for the Christmas social, not watching an old man die. You're not dying. The lie tasted bitter. And I'm exactly where I need to be. Thomas closed his eyes. The bank letter came. Clara's stomach dropped. She'd been checking the post office every day, dreading this moment. When? This morning. Hiram brought it personally. He gestured weakly toward the table. Didn't have the spine to hand it to you direct. The envelope sat there like an accusation, the bank's red seal already broken. Clara picked it up with numb fingers. The words swam before her eyes, but their meaning was clear enough. Final notice. 30 days to settle the debt of $600, or the property would be seized and auctioned. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. That means we have 9 days, Thomas finished. I'm sorry, Clara. I tried. After your mother died, I thought I could hold things together, but the medical bills, the bad timber contracts... He trailed off, coughing. Clara crumpled the letter in her fist. $600 might as well have been $6,000. Her work at the general store brought in barely enough for food and firewood. Her father's carpentry tools, once the pride of Red Hollow, hadn't been touched in months. They had nothing left to sell except the clothes on their backs and the cabin itself. And that was exactly what the bank intended to take. There has to be something. She paced the small room, her mind racing. I could ask Mr. Henderson for extra hours, or maybe the Reverend... Henderson's already cut your wages twice. Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. And the Reverend's church can barely keep its own roof from caving in. There's no help coming, sweetheart. Not from this town. Then I'll go to Denver. I'll find work there. Real work that pays. In 9 days? He shook his head. Even if you could find something, which you couldn't. Not a young woman alone with no references. And I won't have you... He stopped, but Clara knew what he meant. The kind of work available to desperate women in the city. The kind that destroyed you from the inside out. She sank into the chair beside his bed, suddenly exhausted. The fire in the stove was burning low. She needed to bring in more wood before nightfall, needed to make something for supper from the last of the beans and flour, needed to figure out how to perform a miracle before next Thursday. Instead, she just sat there, holding her father's weathered hand, and tried not to cry. A knock at the door broke the silence. Clara wiped her eyes quickly and stood. Probably Mrs. Chen from next door with more of her pity soup. The woman meant well, but Clara was tired of charity, tired of the looks people gave her on the street. Poor Clara Bennett. What a shame. Such a pretty girl, too. She opened the door and froze. The man on the porch was a stranger, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that had gone too long without trimming. His coat was heavy wool, well made but worn, and his boots were the kind loggers wore in the high country. He looked like he'd stepped out of the mountains themselves, hard, weathered, and completely out of place on her doorstep. Miss Bennett? His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. Who's asking? My name's Luke Grayson. He didn't offer his hand. I'm here about your father's debt. Clara's chest tightened. A debt collector. Of course. The bank must have sold the note already, trying to recoup something before the auction. We have 9 days. The letter said, "I'm not from the bank." He glanced past her into the cabin. "Is your father here? I'd like to speak with both of you." Every instinct told her to slam the door in his face, but something in his eyes stopped her. Not kindness exactly, but not cruelty either. Just a flat, appraising look, like he was measuring something. Pause not well enough for visitors. This concerns him directly. And you. Luke shifted his weight, and Clara noticed a scar running along his jaw, mostly hidden by the beard. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. Luke entered the cabin with the economy of movement that marked men who lived in tight spaces. He took in the room with a single sweep. The dying fire, the empty shelves, the medicine bottles lined up like soldiers on the windowsill. His expression didn't change. Thomas had managed to prop himself up. "I know you." "No, sir." Luke removed his hat. "But I know of you. Thomas Bennett, finest carpenter Red Hollow ever had. Built half the houses in this town, plus the church steeple that survived the big wind of '71. That was a long time ago." Thomas studied him with sharp eyes that hadn't been dulled by sickness. "You're not local." "No, sir. I work timber up in the high country." Luke turned to Clara. "Your father owes the bank $600. I'm prepared to settle that debt in full today if you agree to my terms." The room went very still. Clara found her voice first. "What kind of terms?" "Marriage." The word dropped like a stone. "You marry me, Miss Bennett, and I pay off the debt. The cabin stays in your father's name, and I make sure he has proper medicine and care for as long as he needs it." For a moment, Clara thought she'd misheard. Then the words sunk in, and anger flared hot in her chest. "You're insane." "I'm serious. You don't even know me." "I know enough." Luke's gaze was steady. "I know you've been holding your family together alone since your mother passed. I know you work 60 hours a week at Henderson's store for half what a man would make. I know you're smart and strong and exactly the kind of woman who could survive where I live. Where you—" Clara shook her head, trying to process the madness spilling from this stranger's mouth. "You can't just buy a wife like a horse at auction." "I'm not buying you. I'm making an offer." He looked at Thomas. "Sir, with respect, you're dying. Your daughter's going to be alone in a town that has nothing for her except poverty and pity. This way, she has a future, a home, protection." Protection from what? Clara's hands were shaking. "And why would a man who has $600 in his pocket need a wife from Red Hollow?" "Because the women in the cities want different things than I can provide." Luke's jaw tightened. "They want parties and society and a life I have no interest in. I need someone practical, someone who won't break when things get hard, someone who understands that survival isn't pretty, but it's worth fighting for." "You're talking about me like I'm a piece of equipment." "No, I'm talking about you like you're capable." He pulled a leather wallet from his coat. "This is $600 in banknotes. You take them to the bank tomorrow, settle the debt, and we get married by a justice of the peace before the week's out. Or you turn me down, and I walk out that door and you never see me again." Clara stared at the money. More cash than she'd seen in her entire life, right there in his scarred hands. It would save everything. Her father could die in his own bed, with dignity, instead of being evicted into the snow. She could keep the only home she'd ever known. All she had to do was marry a complete stranger and follow him into the mountains. "Pa?" She looked at her father, desperate for guidance. Thomas's eyes were wet. "I can't tell you what to do, Clara girl. This is your life." "But what do you think?" He was quiet for a long time. "I think I'm tired of watching you sacrifice everything for a dying man. I think you deserve a chance at something more than this town can give you. And I think—" He paused, studying Luke with that carpenter's eye that had always seen the quality of a thing beneath its surface. "I think this man is telling the truth, even if he's not telling all of it." Luke's expression flickered, just for a second. Clara rounded on him. "What aren't you telling us?" "Where I live is remote. It's not an easy life, even with resources. The winters are brutal. The nearest town is 3 days' ride. You'd be isolated." "You mean trapped?" "I mean safe." His voice roughened. "The world's getting harder, Miss Bennett. Towns like this are dying. The railroads are changing everything, and people who can't adapt get left behind. Where I am, You'd never have to worry about debt or hunger or men like Henderson taking advantage. You'd have everything you need, except freedom. You'd have more freedom than you do now. He gestured at the cabin. What are you free to do here? Work yourself to death? Watch your father suffer? Hope some local boy marries you so you can trade one kind of poverty for another? The words hit like slaps because they were true. Clara had spent 3 years watching her options narrow, watching the life she'd imagined for herself shrink down to just survival. Every girl she'd grown up with had either married or left. She was the last one, stuck in place by duty and love and the grinding reality of having nowhere else to go. How long do I have to decide? Until sunrise tomorrow. Luke tucked the money back into his coat. I'm staying at the boarding house. You know your answer. You come find me. If you don't show, I'll be gone by noon and you'll never see me again. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Miss Bennett, I'm not a good man. I've done things I'm not proud of, and I live hard because it's the only way I know. But I keep my word. You agree to this, I'll take care of you and your father. That's a promise. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving Clara and her father alone with an impossible choice. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Clara, Thomas started. Don't. She held up a hand. Please, Pa. I need to think. She grabbed her coat and walked out into the cold. Red Hollow looked even more desolate than usual in the fading light. Half the buildings on Main Street stood empty, windows dark, dreams abandoned. The Morrisons' dry goods store had closed last month. The blacksmith had moved his family to Denver. Even the saloon, usually the last business standing in any frontier town, was struggling. Clara walked without direction, her boots crunching on frozen ground. She passed the church where she'd been baptized, the school where she'd learned to read, the cemetery where her mother rested under a simple wooden cross. Every landmark of her life contained in 3 streets and a handful of memories. This town was dying. Luke had been right about that. But marriage to a stranger? Following him into the wilderness with no guarantee of what she'd find there? Clara Bennett? As I live and breathe. She turned to find Hiram Henderson blocking her path. The store owner was a squat man with thin hair and thick fingers, the kind who smiled with his mouth but never his eyes. He'd been making suggestions about Clara's future prospects for the past year, suggestions that made her skin crawl. Mr. Henderson. Saw you had a visitor earlier. Big fellow, mountain type. His smile widened. He offering to buy your father's cabin? Because I might be interested myself once the bank takes possession. Could work out an arrangement where you and Thomas could stay on as tenants. Keep things in the family, so to speak. There was nothing familial about the way he looked at her. The cabin's not for sale. Well, now that's not really your decision, is it? He stepped closer. But like I said, I'm a reasonable man. You ever think about my proposal, Clara? A woman in your position could do a lot worse than having a stable provider, someone established in the community. I have thought about it. She met his eyes, and my answer is still no. His expression soured. Pride's an expensive luxury for someone 9 days from homelessness. You might want to reconsider while you still have options. Clara pushed past him and kept walking, her heart pounding. Men like Henderson were everywhere, circling like vultures, waiting for desperation to make women vulnerable. She'd rather die than give him the satisfaction. But what was the alternative? Luke Grayson? She found herself at the edge of town where the road disappeared into the forest. The mountains rose in the distance, purple shadows against the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, in the frozen wilderness, Luke lived. Doing what? Living how? He'd been deliberately vague about everything except the marriage part. A practical man looking for a practical wife. That's what he'd said. Clara had never thought of herself as particularly practical. She dreamed once of being a teacher, of maybe moving to a real city, seeing things beyond Red Hollow's narrow borders. But dreams required money and opportunity, neither of which she had. What she had was a dying father, a mountain of debt, and a stranger's offer that might be salvation or disaster. She stayed there until the stars came out, trying to find answers in the cold and the dark. The cabin was warm when she returned. Someone had stoked the fire and lit the oil lamp. Her father was asleep, his breathing slightly easier than it had been. On the table, Clara found a covered plate, Mrs. Chen's soup after all, There was also a note in Thomas's shaky handwriting. Whatever you decide, I love you. I'm proud of you. Don't choose based on me. Choose based on the life you want to have. Clara sat down and ate the soup without tasting it. Then she pulled out her mother's old journal, the one place she'd always gone when she needed to think clearly. Her mother, Elizabeth Bennett, had come west as a mail-order bride. She'd left everything familiar behind to marry a carpenter she'd known only through letters. Clara had heard the story 100 times, how terrified Elizabeth had been on the train, how strange and wild Denver had seemed, how close she'd come to turning around and going home. But she hadn't. She'd chosen courage over comfort, and she'd built a life that mattered. Of course, that life had also killed her. The consumption that took Elizabeth had started with a bad winter, no medicine, and a town too far from real doctors. Clara had been 15, old enough to understand that sometimes love wasn't enough to protect you from the world's sharp edges. She flipped through the journal's pages, reading her mother's careful script. Recipes, observations about neighbors, small prayers, and one entry dated shortly before her death. I've been thinking about the choices we make. People say I was brave to come west, but I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. What made me do it wasn't courage. It was the belief that staying in Philadelphia, living the life my parents wanted for me, would kill me slower than any fever. At least here, I got to choose my own death. I got to live my own life first. That counts for something. Clara closed the journal carefully. Her mother had been right. Staying in Red Hollow would kill her, maybe not physically, but in all the ways that mattered. She'd become bitter, worn down, one of those women who disappeared into their own disappointment. She could see the future clearly. Her father dying, the cabin lost, Clara working for Henderson, or someone like him until her youth was gone and her options were nothing. Luke's offer was terrifying, but at least it was different. At least it was a choice. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she packed. Not much. She didn't own much. 2 dresses, her mother's journal, a few books. Her father's carpentry tools, too heavy to carry, but too precious to leave behind. She made a list of things Luke would need to know. Her father's medicine schedule, the name of the doctor in Denver, how to reach the cabin's roof before heavy snow. As the sky began to lighten, Clara washed her face in cold water and braided her hair. She put on her best dress, the dark blue one her mother had made, and pulled on her warmest coat. She looked at herself in the small mirror by the door and barely recognized the woman staring back. 23 years old, brown hair, gray eyes, a face that was pretty enough but nothing special, ordinary in every way except for the decision she was about to make. Thomas woke as she was preparing to leave. "You're going to him," he said. Not a question. "I am." He struggled to sit up. Clara helped him, arranging the pillows. His hands were cold when they gripped hers. "I wish I could tell you this is the right choice," he said. "I wish I knew for certain that you'll be safe and happy. But I can't. All I can tell you is that I see something in that man. Something solid. He's hiding things, yes, but not malice. I've met cruel men, Clara. Luke Grayson isn't one of them." "What if you're wrong? Then you're strong enough to survive it." His eyes were fierce despite the weakness of his body. "You're Elizabeth's daughter. You've got steel in your spine and fire in your heart. Whatever comes, you'll face it." Clara kissed his forehead. "All right. I'll make him bring me back to visit. Don't make promises you can't keep." Thomas smiled sadly. "Just live, Clara girl. That's all I want. Really live." She left before she could change her mind. Oxan. The boarding house was a sagging 2-story building that smelled like boiled cabbage and failure. Clara found Luke in the dining room eating a plate of eggs that looked as grim as everything else in Red Hollow. He saw her and stood immediately. "Miss Bennett." "I'll do it." The words came out steadier than she felt. "I'll marry you, but I have conditions." Something flickered in his eyes. "Go on." "My father stays in the cabin with proper medical care until—" She swallowed. "Until the end. You pay for a real doctor from Denver, not the drunk who passes for one here." "Agreed. I want to be able to write to him, and I want to visit at least twice a year. The trip is hard, especially in winter, but we'll make it work. And if this doesn't work, if I can't stand it up there, or if you turn out to be a liar or worse, I want to be able to leave. No locked doors, no prisoners." Luke's expression went cold. I'm not a jailer, Miss Bennett. You want to leave, you leave. I won't stop you. But understand this. Where I live, leaving means a 3-day journey through mountain passes that can kill you if you don't know what you're doing. It's not like walking out of this town and catching a train. The wilderness doesn't care about your independence. I'll take my chances. He studied her for a long moment, then he nodded. Fair enough. Anything else? Yes. Clara lifted her chin. I want to know what you're not telling me. You have $600 in cash and you live alone in the mountains. You're educated. I can hear it in how you talk. But you dress like a laborer. You want a wife, but you're not looking for companionship. What are you running from? Nothing. Liar. Luke's jaw tightened. You want the truth? Fine. I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of silence and cold and going weeks without hearing another human voice. I'm tired of wondering if I'll die up there and no one will even know for months. I want... He stopped, the words seeming to cost him something. I want someone to talk to. Someone who's real and present and not just a memory. The raw honesty of it caught Clara off guard. This wasn't the speech of a man looking for a housekeeper or convenience. This was loneliness, plain and simple. Why not just hire someone, a housekeeper or... Because hired help leaves. Contracts end. People move on. He met her eyes. I need someone who stays. And you think a wife will stay when hired help won't? I think a wife will have reasons to try. He pulled out the wallet again. You want to do this or not, Miss Bennett? Because I meant what I said. You turn me down now. I'm gone. Clara thought about her father's cabin, about Mrs. Chen's pity soup, about Hiram Henderson's greasy smile, and the future that waited for her in Red Hollow, small, bitter, and inevitable. She thought about her mother, writing in her journal about choosing her own death instead of letting Philadelphia choose it for her. How long do we have before we leave? 3 days. Enough time to handle the paperwork and get you outfitted properly. Then we should go see Judge Morrison. He can marry us this afternoon. Luke's expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders relaxed. You're sure? No, Claire wasn't sure of anything except that staying felt like dying. I'm sure. They walked to the courthouse together, not touching, two strangers about to bind their lives together based on desperation and pragmatism and the thinnest thread of mutual need. The morning sun was bright on the frozen street, making everything look clean and new, which Clara knew was a lie. Red Hollow was dying no matter how pretty the snow made it look. But maybe she didn't have to die with it. Judge Morrison was drunk, as usual, but functional enough to perform a civil ceremony. He squinted at them with rheumy eyes. You two know what you're doing? Yes, sir, Luke said. The judge looked at Clara. Girl, you being coerced? No, sir. You understand marriage is a permanent arrangement, not something you walk away from when it gets inconvenient? Clara almost laughed. Nothing about this was convenient. I understand. Well then. Morrison pulled out the necessary forms. Let's make it official. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, except the judge's half-asleep clerk who served as witness. Luke produced a simple gold band that looked old, worn smooth by time or previous ownership. Clara didn't ask where it came from. She just held out her hand and let him slide it onto her finger. I now pronounce you man and wife. Morrison signed the certificate with a flourish. May you have better luck than most. They stepped out into the cold as husband and wife. Clara looked down at the ring on her hand, this physical proof that she'd just altered the course of her entire life, and felt nothing. No joy, no regret, just a strange numbness, like she was watching herself from a great distance. We should tell your father, Luke said. They walked back to the cabin together. Thomas was awake, sitting up with effort, his eyes bright with fever and something else. Hope, maybe. Or just relief that his daughter wouldn't be alone when he was gone. It's done, Clara said simply. Thomas looked at Luke. You'll keep your promises? Everyone. Then I suppose I should welcome you to the family, such as it is. Thomas extended a trembling hand. Luke shook it carefully, aware of the old man's fragility. Take care of her. I will. And Clara, Thomas turned to his daughter. Remember what your mother always said. The only way out is through. Clara kissed his cheek, tasting salt. I love you, Pa. I love you too, Clara girl. The next 3 days blurred together. Luke handled the debt payment personally, walking into the bank with cash that made the clerk's eyes widen. He arranged for a Denver doctor to visit Thomas twice a week, paid 6 months in advance. He bought Clara proper winter gear, heavy coat, lined boots, gloves that actually fit. He was efficient, methodical, and almost completely silent. They ate meals together at the boarding house, making halting conversation about practical things. Weather, travel routes, what Clara should expect from mountain living. He never touched her, never pressured her, never acted like anything but a business partner arranging logistics, which should have been comforting but somehow made Clara more nervous. On the third night, lying awake in her narrow bed at the boarding house, Clara finally admitted to herself what she'd done. She'd married a stranger, a man she knew virtually nothing about, except that he had money he'd been hiding, lived somewhere remote enough to require serious preparation, and wanted a wife for reasons he still hadn't fully explained. She'd made her choice based on desperation and a dying man's blessing and her own stubborn refusal to become another Red Hollow tragedy. Now she'd have to live with it. They left at dawn on a morning so cold the air hurt to breathe. Luke had 2 horses, his own mount, a massive gray gelding, and a smaller mare for Clara, plus a pack mule loaded with supplies. Clara said goodbye to her father, holding him as gently as she could, trying to memorize the feel of his arms around her. "Be brave," he whispered. "I will." "And Clara, if it's bad, if he's not what he seems, you run. You hear me? Don't stay out of pride or duty. You run." She nodded against his shoulder, not trusting her voice. Mrs. Chen was there, and a few other neighbors who'd come to see the strange spectacle of Clara Bennett leaving town with a mountain man. They looked at her with pity and curiosity and relief that they weren't the ones riding off into the unknown. Luke helped Clara onto the mare with hands that were impersonal but steady. He'd taught her the basics of riding over the past 3 days, enough that she wouldn't fall off immediately. The saddle felt strange and precarious beneath her. "Ready?" Luke asked. Clara looked back at Red Hollow one last time. The sagging buildings, the frozen street, the life she was leaving behind. It wasn't much, but it had been hers. "Ready?" she lied. They rode north toward the mountains. The first day was brutal. Clara had ridden horses before, but never for hours at a stretch, and never in cold this severe. Her thighs screamed. Her hands, even in the good gloves, went numb. The landscape changed gradually from rolling hills to steep inclines, from sparse trees to dense forest. Luke set a punishing pace. They stopped only briefly for water and food, dried meat, and hard bread that Clara chewed without tasting. He didn't make conversation, just pointed out landmarks occasionally. "Creek's safe to drink from. Trail splits here. Left goes to an old mining camp. Watch for ice on this stretch." Clara gritted her teeth and kept up. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of complaining. By sunset, every muscle in her body hurt. Luke made camp with practiced efficiency, setting up a tent Clara hadn't realized they were carrying, building a fire that seemed to materialize from nothing. He handed her a tin cup of coffee so strong it could strip paint. "You did well," he said. First personal comment he'd made all day. "I can barely move. You'll get used to it." He stirred something in a pot over the fire, some kind of stew. "We've got 2 more days of hard riding, then we hit the valley pass. After that it gets easier." "What's in the valley?" "Home." Clara wanted to press, to demand real answers about where he was taking her and what she'd find there. But exhaustion won. She ate the stew, which was surprisingly good, and crawled into the tent Luke had prepared for her. He slept outside by the fire, his rifle within reach, which should have worried her, but somehow didn't. She fell asleep to the sound of wind in the pines and woke to frost on her blankets. The second day was worse than the first. Clara's muscles, already sore, turned to fire. The trail got steeper, rockier, more treacherous. Twice the mare stumbled and Clara's heart stopped. But the horse was sure-footed, and Luke was there immediately, steadying them with a hand and a low word. "You're doing fine," he said. "Just trust the horse. She knows this trail better than you do." They climbed higher. The air grew thinner. Clara's lungs burned with every breath. She focused on the mare's neck, the rhythm of hooves on stone, the simple act of staying upright. Everything else, Red Hollow, her father, the insanity of what she'd done, faded into white noise. That night's camp was in a narrow canyon, protected from the wind. Luke cooked again, then surprised her by pulling out a flask. "Whiskey," he said, "for the pain." Clara took a sip and coughed. It was awful and warming and exactly what she needed. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Necessity. You live alone long enough, you either learn or you starve." "How long have you been alone?" Luke stared into the fire. 5 years, give or take." "What happened 5 years ago?" "My wife died." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She set down the flask carefully. "You were married before?" "Yes." "And you didn't think to mention this? Would it have changed your answer?" He met her eyes. "You married me because you had no choice. My past didn't factor into your decision." He was right, but Clara still felt blindsided. "What was her name?" "Sarah." Luke's voice was flat. "She got sick, winter fever. She died 3 days before the doctor could make it through the snow." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was 5 years ago." But the way he said it made clear that no amount of time would make it past tense. "The ring you're wearing was hers." Clara looked down at the gold band. It felt heavier suddenly, weighted with a grief she hadn't known existed. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you asked, and because you should know what you're walking into." Luke stood, brushing off his pants. Sarah loved the mountains. She loved the solitude. She died anyway, because loving something doesn't protect you from it. I need you to understand that. Where we're going is beautiful and harsh, and it doesn't care about your intentions. It just is. You stay aware and prepared, or you don't survive. "You're trying to scare me." "I'm trying to prepare you." He headed toward his bedroll. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's the hardest day." Clara sat by the fire a while longer, turning the ring on her finger. A dead woman's ring. A dead woman's husband. She'd known there were secrets, but this felt bigger than secrets. This felt like walking into a ghost story. She slept poorly, dreaming of frozen women and trails that led nowhere. The third day, Luke hadn't lied about it being the hardest. The trail became a knife's edge, with sheer drops on one side and vertical rock on the other. Snow started falling mid-morning, thick and blinding. Clara couldn't see 10 feet ahead. She gave the mare her head completely, trusting the animal's instincts over her own non-existent sense of direction. Hours passed. Clara lost feeling in her feet. Her face was numb despite the scarf wrapped around it. She focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on not thinking about how easy it would be to just slip sideways off this mountain and end the misery. Then, suddenly, the trail widened. The snow thinned, and the valley opened before them. Clara pulled the mare to a halt, staring. She'd expected wilderness, trees and rocks, and maybe a rough cabin Luke had built himself. What she saw instead was impossible. The valley stretched wide and green despite the snow, protected by mountains on all sides. A river ran through it, dark and swift, and scattered along its banks were buildings. Not rough cabins, actual buildings. A sawmill with smoke rising from its chimney, long structures that looked like bunkhouses, a massive barn, and at the far end, commanding the valley like a fortress, stood a house that could only be called an estate. 3 stories of timber and stone, with wide windows and a covered porch that wrapped around the entire front. Outbuildings clustered nearby. Stables, a smokehouse, what looked like a workshop. The whole compound sat on a rise, overlooking the valley like some frontier lord's holding. "What the hell is this?" Clara's voice came out hoarse. Luke had stopped beside her. He looked at the valley with an expression Clara couldn't read. "Home," he said. "Welcome to Winter Ridge." Clara turned to him slowly. "You're not a poor mountain man?" "No." "You're not a drifter living hand to mouth?" "No." "What are you then?" Luke met her eyes. "I own this valley, the timber rights, the mill, the contracts with 3 railroads. I employ 40 men year-round, more in peak season. He paused. "I'm what people in Denver would call wealthy." Clara's hands tightened on the reins. "You lied to me. I omitted details. You let me think you were desperate. You let me think—" She broke off, fury and confusion warring in her chest. "Why?" "Because I needed to know you'd marry me for the right reasons." Luke's voice was rough. Not the money, not the estate, not some fantasy of being a rich man's wife. I needed someone who'd say yes because they were choosing a life, not a bank account. You had no right. I had every right. He urged his horse forward. I buried one wife who married me for love and couldn't handle the isolation. I won't bury another. You married me knowing the worst. Now you get to see the best. Come on. He rode down into the valley without looking back, leaving Clara frozen on the trail above. She looked at the estate, her home now, apparently. She looked at the mountains behind her, the impossible trail she'd just survived. She looked at the ring on her finger, a dead woman's ring, and felt the weight of every choice that had led her here. Then Clara Grayson, took a deep breath and followed her husband down into the valley. Whatever she'd gotten herself into, there was no way out but through. The descent into the valley felt like riding into another world. With each switchback down the mountain trail, the wind died and the temperature rose just enough that Clara could feel her fingers again. The snow thinned to scattered flurries, then stopped altogether. Through breaks in the pine trees, she caught glimpses of the impossible estate below, its windows catching the late afternoon sun like signals. Luke rode ahead without speaking, his back rigid. Clara's anger simmered alongside her exhaustion. 3 days of brutal riding, 3 days of letting her believe they were heading to some rough cabin where she'd spend her life hauling water and chopping wood, and all along he'd been bringing her to this. An empire hidden in the wilderness. The trail finally leveled out onto a proper road, dirt packed hard by wagon wheels, with drainage ditches on either side. They passed the sawmill first, a massive structure built alongside the river. The blade was silent now, but Clara could see logs stacked in enormous piles, and the building itself hummed with stored energy, like it was just resting between shifts. 2 men in work clothes stood near the entrance, smoking. They straightened when they saw Luke. "Mr. Grayson," one called out, "wasn't expecting you back for another week." Plans changed. Luke didn't slow his horse. "Everything running smooth?" "Yes, sir. Johnson's team brought in a good haul from the north section. We'll be processing through the weekend." Luke nodded and kept riding. Clara noticed the men staring at her with unconcealed curiosity. She kept her eyes forward, chin up, trying to look like a woman who belonged here instead of someone who'd been deceived into coming. They passed the bunkhouses next, long buildings with smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Through windows, Clara saw men sitting at tables, playing cards, eating. A few looked up as they rode by. Word would spread fast, she realized. The boss had brought home a wife. By morning, everyone in this valley would know. The main house sat at the end of the road, even more imposing up close. The timber was dark with age and weather, but well maintained. The stone foundation looked solid enough to last 100 years. Wide steps led up to the covered porch, where rocking chairs sat like sentries. Claire had seen houses like this in Denver, owned by railroad barons and mining magnates. She'd never imagined living in one. Luke dismounted in front of the stables, a building that was itself bigger than her father's cabin. A young man emerged immediately, probably 16, with red hair and a smattering of freckles. "Mr. Grayson, you're back early." "Jamie," Luke handed over his horse's reins. "This is my wife, Clara. She'll need help getting down." The boy's eyes went wide. "Your wife? Nobody said, oh. Nobody knew. Luke's tone suggested the topic was closed. "Take care of the horses, and find Margaret. Tell her we'll need the east bedroom prepared and hot water for baths." Clara tried to dismount on her own, but her legs betrayed her. 3 days of riding had turned her muscles to jelly. She would have fallen if Jamie hadn't rushed over to help, his young face crimson with embarrassment. "Sorry, ma'am. Here, just lean on me." She managed to get both feet on the ground, though standing required more concentration than it should have. Everything hurt in new and creative ways. Luke appeared at her elbow, not touching, but close enough to catch her if she fell. "You need to walk a bit," he said. "If you sit down now, you'll seize up completely." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausted and sore, and probably wondering if you made the worst mistake of your life." He gestured toward the house. "Walk with me. 5 minutes around the porch. Then you can collapse." Clara wanted to argue, but her body agreed with him. She forced her legs to move, each step a small agony. Luke walked beside her, matching her painful shuffle without comment. The porch wrapped around the entire house, just as it had appeared from above. The view from the back took Clara's breath away. The valley spread out below them, the river winding through it like silver thread. Mountains rose on all sides, purple in the fading light, creating a natural fortress. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Sarah designed this porch, Luke said quietly. She wanted to be able to see the whole valley from the house. Used to sit out here for hours just watching the light change. Clara gripped the railing, her knuckles white. I don't want to hear about Sarah. You're living in her house, sleeping in her bedroom, wearing her ring. His voice was harsh. You don't get to pretend she didn't exist. I'm not pretending anything. Clara turned to face him. But I also didn't sign up to be a replacement ghost. You want to talk about your dead wife, fine. But don't expect me to compete with her memory. Luke's jaw worked. For a moment, Clara thought he might shout, but instead he just nodded. Fair enough. They completed the walk in silence. By the time they reached the front door again, Clara's legs were trembling. Luke opened the door and gestured her inside. The entry hall was bigger than the entire main room of her father's cabin. Dark wood paneling, a staircase that curved upward, oil lamps already lit against the gathering dusk. The floor was actual hardwood, polished smooth, with rugs that looked expensive. Through open doorways, Clara glimpsed a sitting room, a dining room with a table that could seat 20, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves. A woman appeared from the back of the house, wiping her hands on an apron. She was perhaps 50, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Luke Grayson, you're going to give me a heart attack, appearing without warning. Then she saw Clara and stopped. Oh. Margaret, this is Clara, my wife. Clara, Margaret runs this house and has for the past 15 years. Anything you need? She's the one to ask. Margaret's expression cycled through shock, confusion, and something that might have been approval. Your wife? Well, that's certainly news. She looked Clara up and down, not rudely but thoroughly. You look half frozen and completely worn out. Come on, let's get you upstairs and into something warm. I can manage, Clara started. Honey, you can barely stand. Margaret's tone was kind but firm. Save your pride for when you've had a bath and some food. Luke, make yourself useful and tell Cook we need dinner in an hour. Something hot and simple. Luke actually smiled, just a flicker. Yes, ma'am. He disappeared toward the back of the house, and Margaret took Clara's arm with surprising gentleness. Come on then. Let's get you settled. The stairs were a challenge. Clara's legs threatened mutiny with each step. Margaret didn't rush her, just provided a steady arm and kept up a stream of commentary. Known Luke since he was a boy, his father built this place from nothing, turned it into something real. Luke took over when he was barely 22, after his father passed. Done well by it too, though he works himself half to death most of the time. She glanced at Clara. Didn't know he was looking for a wife again. I don't think he was looking, Clara said. More like solving a problem. And what problem would that be? Loneliness, apparently, among other things. Margaret made a thoughtful noise, but didn't pry further. They reached the second floor, a hallway lined with closed doors. Margaret led her to one at the end, pushing it open to reveal a bedroom that made Clara stop in her tracks. It was beautiful. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, with a thick quilt in shades of blue and cream. Matching dresser and wardrobe, both made from dark wood that glowed in the lamplight. A fireplace along one wall, already crackling with fresh wood. Windows overlooking the valley, with curtains that pooled on the floor. And in one corner, a copper bathtub that looked like heaven itself. Jamie's bringing up hot water, Margaret said, reading Clara's expression. You soak as long as you need. I'll have some clothes laid out. You're taller than Sarah was, but we'll make do until we can get you properly fitted. Clara flinched at the name. Margaret noticed but didn't apologize. She's dead 3 years now, not 5 like Luke probably told you. Winter fever, like he said, but it wasn't quick. Took her a month to go, and it was hard. Luke watched every minute of it. Margaret moved to the wardrobe, pulling out towels. He loved her something fierce. Still does, I imagine. But the dead don't keep you warm at night, and this house has been too quiet too long. Whatever brought you here, I'm glad you came. Even though you don't know me, I know you rode 3 days through mountain passes in winter to get here. That takes spine. Margaret set the towels by the tub. The rest we'll figure out as we go. She left, promising to return with food. Clara stood alone in the beautiful room and felt the full weight of everything crash down on her. She'd married a wealthy man who'd lied by omission. She was living in a dead woman's house, wearing a dead woman's ring, sleeping in what was probably a dead woman's bed. And she was stuck here, in a valley surrounded by mountains that would kill her if she tried to leave on her own. The door opened again. Jamie staggered in with 2 large buckets of steaming water, followed by another young man carrying 2 more. They filled the tub with efficiency born of practice, nodded politely to Clara, and disappeared. The bath was the best thing Clara had ever experienced. She sank into the hot water with a groan that was almost obscene, feeling her abused muscles slowly unknot. The soap smelled like lavender. The towels were thick and soft. Everything in this room spoke of money and care and a life so far removed from Red Hollow that it might as well be a different country. She stayed in until the water cooled, then forced herself out. On the bed, Margaret had laid out a nightgown and a thick robe, both made of fabric softer than anything Clara had owned. She put them on and sat on the edge of the bed, her wet hair dripping onto the expensive quilt. A knock at the door. "It's Margaret." "Come in." Margaret entered with a tray, soup, bread, cheese, and a pot of tea. She set it on a small table by the fireplace. "Eat, then sleep. Tomorrow's soon enough to start figuring things out." "Where's Luke?" "His room's down the hall. He won't bother you tonight." Margaret paused at the door. "He's a good man, Clara. Rough around the edges and too used to being alone, but good at his core. Give him a chance." Then she was gone, and Clara was alone with the soup and her racing thoughts. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Then she climbed into the enormous bed, sinking into a mattress that felt like sleeping on a cloud compared to her narrow cot in Red Hollow. The sheets smelled like cedar and lavender. The pillows were actually soft. Clara lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere down the hall was Luke, the stranger she'd married. Somewhere in this valley were 40 men who now had a boss's wife to gossip about. And somewhere far away her father was dying in a cabin she'd probably never see again. She fell asleep before she could start crying. Morning came too early, announced by pale light through the windows and birds that hadn't gotten the message about winter. Clara's body had seized up exactly as Luke had warned, every muscle screaming protest. She managed to get out of bed through sheer stubbornness, then had to sit down again immediately. Margaret appeared like a mind reader, carrying more hot water and a cup of something that smelled medicinal. "Drink this. It'll help with the soreness." "What is it?" "Willow bark tea. Tastes like dirt but works." Margaret poured fresh water into a basin. "You need help getting dressed?" Clara's pride said no. Her body said yes. "Please." Between them, they managed to get Clara into clothes that almost fit. A simple dress in dark green, wool stockings, practical boots. Margaret braided her hair with quick, efficient fingers. "There. You look almost human." "I feel like I was trampled by horses." "Give it 2 days. Your body will adjust." Margaret headed for the door. "Breakfast is in 30 minutes. Luke's probably already been up for hours, but he'll come back to eat with you. Fair warning, the men will all want to look at you. They're not used to women around." Clara's stomach dropped. "I have to meet everyone today?" "Better to get it over with. Show them you're real and not going to faint at rough language." Margaret smiled. "You survived the trip. You'll survive this." Clara made her way downstairs slowly, using the railing for support. The house was brighter in daylight, less imposing, but no less impressive. She heard voices from the back and followed them to a large kitchen where an older man with a magnificent mustache was cooking over a massive stove. "You must be Clara," he said, without turning around. "I'm Cook. Real name's Bernard, but nobody's called me that in 20 years. You like eggs?" "Yes." "Good, because that's what you're getting." He slid a plate across the wooden counter. Eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, toast. More food than Clara usually ate in 2 days. "Sit. Eat. You're too skinny." Clara sat at the counter, too overwhelmed to argue. The food was incredible. She was halfway through when Luke appeared, his hair wet like he'd just washed. He changed into clean clothes, dark trousers, a heavy shirt, boots that had seen hard use but were well maintained. "You're up," he said. "Margaret's tea is apparently miraculous. She dosed the loggers with it whenever they overdo. Keeps them functional." He poured himself coffee from a pot on the stove. "How are you feeling?" Like I rode 3 days through the mountains. Fair. He leaned against the counter, not sitting. We should talk. Now there's an understatement. Cook cleared his throat. I'm going to go check on something elsewhere. He vanished through a door, giving them privacy. Luke took a long drink of coffee. I know you're angry. Do you? I'd be angry if our positions were reversed. Would you? Because it seems like you're very good at keeping secrets. Clara set down her fork. What else haven't you told me? Any other dead wives I should know about? Secret children? A criminal past? No children. No crimes that got me arrested anyway. He almost smiled. And no other wives, dead or living. Just Sarah. Tell me about her. Why? Because Margaret's right. I'm living in her house. I should know who she was. Luke was quiet for a long moment. She was a teacher's daughter from Denver. We met when I was buying supplies for the mill. She was 20, I was 24. She thought the mountains were romantic, thought she wanted to live somewhere wild and beautiful, away from the city. But she didn't? She wanted to, she tried, but wanting isn't the same as being able. His voice went flat. The isolation ate at her. By the second winter, she was spending days without speaking. I'd come home and find her just sitting by the window, staring at nothing. The third winter, she got sick, and by the time I could get a doctor through the snow, it was too late. I'm sorry. You keep saying that. Luke set down his cup. I don't need your pity. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what this place demands. It's beautiful, yes. It's safe, and you'll never want for anything material. But it's also completely isolated for months at a time. The nearest real town is 3 days away. In deep winter, sometimes we can't leave at all. You'll spend weeks seeing the same 40 men and nobody else. You think I'll crack like Sarah did? I think it's a possibility I need to prepare for. He met her eyes. That's why I didn't tell you about the money. If you married me thinking you were getting a rich husband and an easy life, you'd hate this place within a month. But if you came here expecting hardship and found something better instead, you might stay. Clara stood up, ignoring her protesting muscles. You're talking about me like I'm a horse you're training. Like if you manage my expectations correctly, I'll perform how you want. That's not. It is exactly what you're doing. You manipulated me from the start. You showed up in Red Hollow with your poor mountain man act, made yourself just desperate enough to be believable, and now you're surprised I feel deceived? I never lied to you. You just didn't tell the truth. Which is the same thing. Clara grabbed the edge of the counter. I made my choice, Luke. I married you, I came here, and I'm not leaving. Not because I can't, and not because you've trapped me, but because going back to Red Hollow would mean everything I sacrificed meant nothing. But don't mistake my staying for forgiveness. Luke's expression was unreadable. Fair enough. What do you want from me? Honesty. Complete honesty from now on. No more secrets, no more omissions, no more managing my expectations. She lifted her chin. And I want to understand what I'm actually doing here. Am I your wife in name only? Am I supposed to run the house? What's my role? I don't know, Luke admitted. I didn't think that far ahead. Clearly, Clara moved toward the door, needing air. I'm going to explore the valley. Don't try to stop me. I wouldn't dream of it, but take Jamie with you. The terrain's tricky and you don't know the land yet. Clara wanted to argue, but he was right. She nodded stiffly and left before he could say anything else. She found Jamie in the stables, mucking out stalls. He looked up with a nervous smile. Morning, Mrs. Grayson. The name made her flinch. Call me Clara, and I need a tour of the valley. Can you spare an hour? Yes, ma'am. I mean Clara. He set aside his shovel. You want to walk or ride? Walk. I don't think I could get on a horse again if my life depended on it. Jamie laughed, a bright sound that eased some of Clara's tension. Fair enough. Come on, I'll show you around. They left the house compound and headed toward the main valley floor. Up close, the operation was even more impressive than it had appeared from above. The sawmill was a feat of engineering, with a water wheel driving the massive blade. Stacks of finished lumber sat in covered sheds, waiting for transport. Jamie explained the process, how teams went into the forest with specially trained horses, how they marked and cut specific trees, how everything was hauled back to the mill for processing. Mr. Grayson's real particular about what gets cut, Jamie said. Lots of operations just clear-cut everything, but he insists on selective harvesting. Says it keeps the forest healthy for future generations. Some of the other owners think he's crazy, but his timber's the best quality in the territory. They passed the bunkhouses, and several men called out greetings to Jamie. They all stared at Clara with varying degrees of curiosity and caution. She nodded politely and kept walking. "They're not bad men," Jamie said quietly. "Just not used to women. Most of them come here to get away from something. Bad marriages, debts, trouble with the law. Mr. Grayson doesn't ask too many questions as long as they work hard and stay honest." "A valley of refugees," Clara murmured. "I suppose so, yeah." Jamie kicked at a loose stone. "I came here 3 years ago when my pa died. Didn't have anywhere else to go. Mr. Grayson took me on even though I was just 13 and didn't know timber from sawdust. Taught me everything, gave me a place to sleep, and good food. He's hard but fair." They reached the river, which was wider than Clara had realized. A sturdy bridge crossed it, leading to more forest on the far side. The water was crystal clear, cold enough that she could see her breath when she leaned over the railing. "It's beautiful," she said. "Gets more beautiful the longer you're here," Jamie said. "At least, that's what people say. I never want to leave." Clara looked back at the valley. The mill, the houses, the estate on the hill. A complete world, self-sufficient and separate from everything else. A kingdom hidden in the mountains, ruled by a man who'd brought her here for reasons she still didn't fully understand. "Can I ask you something?" Jamie's voice was hesitant. "Of course." "Why'd you marry him, if you don't mind me asking? I mean, Mr. Grayson's a good man, but he's not exactly warm." Clara smiled despite herself. "That's an understatement, but the answer's complicated. Let's just say we both needed something, and this seemed like the solution." "Does it feel like a solution?" "Ask me in 6 months." They walked farther, Jamie pointing out landmarks. The meadow where they grazed horses in summer. The path that led to a hot spring, currently frozen but incredible once the weather warmed. The old cabin that had been the original structure before Luke's father built the estate. It was falling apart now, but Jamie said Mr. Grayson wouldn't let anyone tear it down. By the time they circled back to the house, Clara's legs were shaking again, but her head felt clearer. She understood the valley better now. More importantly, she understood that this wasn't just Luke's isolated refuge. It was a working community, with its own rhythms and relationships and rules. Margaret was waiting on the porch. "Luke's asking for you. He's in the study." Clara found the study on the first floor, a wood-paneled room lined with books and maps. Luke sat at a massive desk covered in papers, a ledger open in front of him. He looked up when she entered. "How was the tour?" "Illuminating. Your operation is impressive." "It pays the bills." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. We should finish our conversation from this morning." Clara sat, though her body protested. "I'm listening. You asked what your role is. The honest answer is, I don't know, because I've been doing this alone for years. But here's what I need." He leaned back in his chair. "This house runs on Margaret and Cook, but they're not getting any younger. The men need someone to handle disputes that aren't business-related. We get supplies by wagon train 4 times a year, and someone needs to coordinate what we order and how it's distributed. And you need a partner," Clara interrupted. "Not a decoration, not a housekeeper. A partner." "Yes." "Why didn't you just say that from the start?" "Because women who think they're marrying a partner get different ideas about what that means. They want equal say in everything, including things they don't understand." He held up a hand when Clara bristled. "I'm not saying you're incapable. I'm saying there are aspects of this operation you'll need time to learn. I can't have someone undermining my decisions with the men because they think marriage gives them authority over things they don't comprehend yet. So you want me to be a partner, but only when convenient. I want you to be a partner who earns the men's respect first. Then your authority will actually mean something." Luke pulled out a sheet of paper covered in figures. "Look at this. These are the production numbers for the last quarter. Do you know what any of these mean?" Clara looked at the columns of numbers and abbreviations. "No." "Exactly. So if you tried to make decisions about production schedules or work assignments right now, the men would ignore you. But if you spend the next few months learning the operation, understanding what drives the numbers, proving you're smart and capable, then when you speak, people will listen." He wasn't wrong, and Clara hated that. "Fine. Teach me." "What?" "You said I need to learn the operation, so teach me. I'm not stupid, and I learn fast." Show me what all these numbers mean. Explain the business. Make me actually useful instead of just another mouth to feed. Luke stared at her like he'd never seen her before. You're serious? Completely. You brought me here to be a partner. I'm holding you to that. But I'm not going to be a partner in name only while I sit around doing needlepoint. A slow smile spread across Luke's face, the first genuine one Clara had seen. You don't do needlepoint, do you? I can barely sew a straight seam. My mother despaired of me ever being properly domestic. Thank God. Luke stood, gathering papers. All right. We'll start tomorrow. I'll show you the mill operation, explain the contracts, walk you through the finances. Fair warning, it's going to be dull and technical and you'll probably hate half of it. I grew up watching my father calculate board feet and stress loads. I can handle technical. Luke extended his hand across the desk. Partners then, for real this time. Clara shook his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, and warm. Partners. That night at dinner, a formal affair in the dining room with Margaret serving and Cook outdoing himself, Clara felt like she could finally breathe. Luke was still reserved, still carrying his ghosts, but he talked to her like an actual person. He asked about her father's carpentry work, seemed genuinely interested in her opinions about the valley, even laughed once when she made a dry comment about the decorating. Sarah chose most of this, he said, gesturing at the formal place settings. She wanted everything to be civilized. Said just because we lived in the wilderness didn't mean we had to be uncivilized. Was she right? I'm not sure, but I kept everything the way she liked it. Seemed wrong to change it after... He trailed off. Clara set down her fork. Luke, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear me. All right. I will never be Sarah. I don't want to be Sarah, and I can't live in this house feeling like I'm constantly being measured against a memory. She met his eyes. If we're going to make this work, you need to let me be myself. That might mean changing things she chose. It might mean doing things differently than she did. And you need to be okay with that. Luke was quiet for a long time. Clara thought she might have pushed too far. Then he nodded slowly. You're right. It's not fair to either of you. Sarah's gone, and you're here. I'll try to remember that. That's all I'm asking. They finished dinner in more comfortable silence. Afterward, Luke showed Clara the library, which was even more extensive than she'd realized. Entire shelves of technical manuals and forestry guides, but also novels, poetry, history. He pulled down a worn copy of a surveying manual. This was my father's. He taught himself engineering from books like this. Built everything in this valley from scratch. He handed it to Clara. You want to understand this place? Start here. The valley is shaped by the land and the river. Everything else follows from that. Clara took the book carefully. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow I'm putting you to work. He moved toward the door, then paused. Clara, I'm glad you're here. I know I'm not good at saying things like that, but it's true. Before she could respond, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Clara stood alone in the library, holding the manual, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love. That would take time, if it came at all. But maybe understanding. Maybe the beginnings of respect. She took the book upstairs and read until her eyes grew heavy. The next morning, true to his word, Luke took her to the mill. He explained every step of the process, introduced her to the foreman, a gruff man named Peterson who clearly didn't know what to make of having the boss's wife underfoot, and let her ask as many questions as she wanted. The week that followed established a rhythm. Mornings at the mill or in the forest with the logging teams. Afternoons in the study, going over contracts and finances until Clara's head spun. Evenings in the library or sometimes the sitting room where Luke taught her to play chess and usually won but had to work harder each time. Clara learned that Luke was scrupulously fair with his workers, paying above standard rates and maintaining strict safety protocols that other operations ignored. She learned that his contracts with the railroads were ironclad because he'd spent years building a reputation for quality and reliability. She learned that he really did care about the forest, that his selective harvesting wasn't just business sense, but genuine belief in stewardship. She also learned that the valley respected strength. When she helped Margaret organize the supply order and caught an error that would have cost them 3 barrels of salt pork, word spread through the bunkhouses. When she didn't flinch during a conversation with Peterson about a worker who'd been injured and needed discipline for ignoring safety rules, the foreman's attitude shifted from skeptical to cautiously approving. And slowly, carefully, Clara began to think she might actually survive this. Then, exactly 2 weeks after her arrival, a fancy carriage arrived in the valley, drawn by 4 matched horses and driven by a man in livery that looked ridiculous in the wilderness setting. Luke saw it from the study window and went very still. Damn! What? Who is that? My Aunt Eleanor. His voice was flat. This is going to be a problem. Clara watched the color drain from Luke's face as the carriage rolled to a stop in front of the house. He looked like a man preparing for battle, his jaw set and shoulders rigid. How bad is this? Clara asked. Eleanor Grayson owns 30% of the company. My father left it to her when he died, along with enough voting rights to make my life difficult if she chooses. Luke moved away from the window. She lives in Denver, hasn't been up here in 5 years. The fact that she's here now means someone told her about you. And that's a problem because she had plans for me to marry her business partner's daughter, a merger that would give her more control over the operation. He looked at Clara. You being here ruins that. Before Clara could respond, Margaret appeared in the doorway, her expression tight. Mrs. Eleanor Grayson is here to see you. She's brought guests. Luke cursed under his breath. How many? 4, plus her personal maid and the driver. Of course she did. Luke straightened his shirt, his face settling into a mask of polite indifference. Send them to the sitting room. Offer refreshments. And Margaret? Don't leave Clara alone with them. Margaret's eyes narrowed. That bad? Worse. Clara followed Luke down the hallway, her stomach knotting. 2 weeks ago, she'd been worried about losing her father's cabin. Now she was apparently about to face wealthy Denver society types who had a financial stake in destroying her marriage. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. The sitting room had been transformed. 5 people stood or sat in various poses of casual wealth, looking completely out of place against the rustic elegance of Luke's house. Clara took them in with one sweeping glance. Eleanor Grayson dominated the room despite being barely 5 feet tall. She was perhaps 60, dressed in a traveling suit that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe had ever been worth. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, jewelry that caught the light with every movement, and eyes like chips of ice. Beside her stood a younger woman, maybe 30, beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, polished, perfect, and utterly cold. Her dress was deep burgundy silk, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken an hour. She watched Luke with possessive interest that made Clara's skin crawl. The 3 men were cut from similar cloth. Expensive suits, groomed beards, the look of people who'd never done manual labor in their lives. One was older, probably the business partner Eleanor had mentioned. The other 2 were younger, with the predatory alertness of lawyers or investors. Eleanor spoke first, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Luke, how lovely to see you. You look well. Aunt Eleanor. Luke's tone was perfectly neutral. This is unexpected. I'm sure it is. Eleanor's gaze slid to Clara, taking in her simple dress and work-roughened hands with undisguised disdain. And you must be the mountain girl I've heard so much about. How quaint. Clara felt her temper flare but kept her voice level. Clara Grayson, Luke's wife. So I've been told. Eleanor settled into a chair like she owned it. Though I must say, Luke, a letter would have been appropriate. Finding out about your marriage through idle gossip was quite the shock. I didn't realize my personal life required your approval. When your personal life affects the company, it absolutely requires my approval. Eleanor gestured to the blonde woman. You remember Victoria Ashworth, Richard's daughter? You 2 were quite close before that unfortunate business with Sarah. Victoria smiled, showing perfect teeth. Luke, it's been too long. Luke's expression didn't change. Victoria. The older man stepped forward, extending his hand. Richard Ashworth. We met briefly last year at the shareholders' meeting. These are my associates, Mr. Brennan and Mr. Hughes. We're here on business. What kind of business? Luke ignored the offered hand, the kind that requires privacy. Richard glanced at Clara. Perhaps your wife could give us the room. No. Luke moved to stand beside Clara. Anything you have to say can be said in front of her. Eleanor's laugh was like breaking glass. How romantic. Very well. Richard has a proposal that could substantially increase the company's profitability. but it requires certain structural changes that affect your authority as primary shareholder. I'm listening. Richard pulled papers from his leather case. We've identified an opportunity to expand operations significantly. There are 3 adjacent valleys currently under federal land claims that are about to be released for commercial development. If we move fast, we can secure the timber rights and triple our output within 2 years. Triple output means triple harvesting, Luke said. The forest can't sustain that. The forests are a renewable resource, Brennan interjected. He had the smooth voice of someone who sold snake oil for a living. Cut them down. They grow back. Simple economics. It's not simple, and you know it. Luke's voice went hard. Clear-cutting destroys watersheds, causes erosion, and leaves nothing for future operations. My father built this company on sustainable practices. Your father also died before seeing what this company could become, Eleanor said coldly. We're offering you a chance to modernize, Luke, to compete with the larger operations in Oregon and Washington. But it requires capital investment and operational changes, changes that you, as sole decision-maker, have consistently refused to consider. Clara watched the tension ratchet up, understanding dawning. This wasn't just about expansion. This was a power play. Luke saw it too. What exactly are you proposing? Victoria spoke for the first time, her voice honeyed. A restructuring of the board. Eleanor and Richard would become equal partners with you, each holding 33%. You'd still be involved in operations, but major decisions would require majority vote. You want to take away my control. We want to protect our investment, Richard corrected. Your sentimental attachment to these trees is costing us money. The timber market is booming, and you're sitting on a fortune while refusing to capitalize on it. Because I'm building something that lasts. Luke's hands were fists at his sides. Not something that extracts maximum profit in 5 years and leaves destruction behind. How noble, Eleanor said. And how foolish. Luke, be realistic. The world is changing. The age of small, sustainable operations is ending. Either we grow or we get absorbed by someone who will. I'm not selling. We're not asking you to sell. We're asking you to be reasonable. Eleanor's eyes glittered. Of course, if you refuse, we have other options. As minority shareholders, we can petition for oversight if we believe the company is being mismanaged. Force an audit. Tie you up in legal proceedings for years. That's a threat. That's business, darling. Clara had heard enough. So let me understand this correctly. You want Luke to destroy the forests, abandon the principles his father built this company on, and hand over control to people who've never set foot in these mountains except to make demands. And if he refuses, you'll drag him through courts until he can't afford to operate. Do I have that right? Eleanor's gaze fixed on Clara like a snake eyeing prey. My dear girl, this is a conversation for people who understand business. Your little backwater town probably traded in chickens and promises, but this is serious money. Perhaps you should go check on dinner, or whatever it is you do here. I manage supply logistics, review contracts, and understand the operation well enough to know your proposal is designed to strip assets and leave wreckage. Clara kept her voice steady. I may not have your pedigree, Mrs. Grayson, but I can read a balance sheet. And I can read people. You're not here to help the company. You're here to control it. Silence fell like a hammer. Victoria's perfect face showed shock. The lawyers looked intrigued. Richard's expression went cold, and Eleanor's smile could have frozen fire. Well, Eleanor said softly, the mountain girl has teeth. How unexpected. Luke put a hand on Clara's arm, a warning or support. She couldn't tell. You've made your proposal. The answer is no. I'm not restructuring the board. I'm not clear-cutting adjacent valleys, and I'm not letting you turn this company into another extraction operation that destroys everything for short-term profit. Then you're a fool, Richard said flatly. We gave you a chance to do this cooperatively. Now we'll do it the hard way. Meaning what? Brennan stepped forward, pulling out more papers. Meaning we've already filed preliminary motions for a shareholder review. Meaning we've contacted 3 of your major railroad contracts and suggested they might want to consider reliability concerns. Meaning we've hired investigators to look into every aspect of your operation, looking for any irregularity we can exploit. You're trying to sabotage my business. We're protecting our interests, Eleanor corrected. And there's one more thing you should know, that charming marriage of yours. We've looked into it. Very sudden, wasn't it? A girl from nowhere, married to a wealthy man, no prenuptial agreement. Some might say it looks suspicious, like perhaps someone married for money and access. Clara's blood went cold. Luke's grip on her arm tightened. Careful, Aunt. Oh, I'm being very careful, because here's what's going to happen. Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirts. In 3 weeks, there's a reception at the governor's mansion in Denver. All the territory's business leaders will be there. You will attend, Luke, and you will bring your wife. You will introduce her to society. She will be inspected and judged, and everyone will see exactly what kind of woman you've tied yourself to. I don't take orders from you. No, but you care about your reputation. And right now, rumors are spreading that you've married some desperate frontier girl who saw an opportunity and took it. That maybe your judgment has been compromised by loneliness or worse. If you hide her away up here, those rumors become facts. But if you bring her to Denver and she proves herself capable of operating in civilized society, Eleanor's smile was vicious. Well, then perhaps people will believe she's actually worthy of the Grayson name. Victoria laughed, a crystalline sound. Can you imagine? Little Mountain Clara at the governor's reception? She'd be eaten alive in 5 minutes. Which is exactly the point, Eleanor said. Luke, you have a choice. Restructure the company willingly, or watch us dismantle your marriage, your reputation, and eventually your control. Bring the girl to Denver and prove she's not just some opportunist. Either way, we win. Get out. Luke's voice was deadly quiet. Get out of my house. We're leaving. We have rooms at the hotel in Granite Falls. Eleanor pulled on her gloves. 3 weeks, Luke. The governor's reception, formal attire. Let's see if your mountain bride can manage not to embarrass the family completely. They filed out, Victoria pausing to give Luke a lingering look that made Clara want to hit something. Margaret appeared to show them out, her face like stone. The moment the front door closed, Luke slammed his fist into the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. Damn her. Damn all of them. Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. They're going to destroy us. They're going to try. Luke turned to face her, and Clara saw real fear in his eyes for the first time. Clara, I'm sorry. I never thought Eleanor would move this aggressively. I thought I had more time to build up defenses. What kind of defenses? Legal ones, financial ones, but if she's already filed motions and poisoned the railroad contracts. He ran a hand through his hair. She's right about one thing. If I hide you away, it confirms everything she's saying. That you're unsuitable. That I married beneath me out of desperation. It gives her ammunition for a mismanagement claim. So we go to Denver. You don't understand what that means. The governor's reception is the social event of the season. Everyone who matters will be there. They'll scrutinize everything about you, how you dress, how you talk, who your family is. They'll be looking for any excuse to dismiss you as beneath their notice. Clara thought about Red Hollow, about being poor Clara Bennett, who worked at the general store, about knowing that everyone in town pitied her and thought she'd wasted her potential, about marrying a stranger to escape that life. I've been judged before, she said quietly. I survived it. This is different. These people are professional social predators. They'll tear you apart and smile while doing it. Then teach me. Clara met his eyes. You said you wanted a partner. Partners face things together. You know their world. Teach me how to survive in it. Luke stared at her for a long moment. You're serious. What choice do we have? If we don't go, they win without a fight. At least this way we have a chance. It's not just about attending. You'd need to look the part, act the part, know the right things to say to the right people. He shook his head. 3 weeks isn't enough time. Then we'd better start now. Margaret cleared her throat from the doorway. She's right, and I can help. I wasn't always a housekeeper, Luke. I grew up in Philadelphia society before I married and moved west. I know how those vipers operate. Luke looked between them. You're both insane. Probably, Clara said. But I didn't come this far to let some rich witch destroy everything because I don't know which fork to use. If I have to learn to be a society lady, I'll learn. It's more than forks. It's knowing who's allied with whom, which families are feuding, what topics to avoid, how to read a room. Luke's voice was strained. One wrong word to the wrong person could damage relationships I've spent years building. Then I won't say wrong words. Clara's jaw set. I'm not stupid, Luke. I'm uneducated in their ways, but I can learn. The question is whether you trust me enough to try. That hit home. Luke flinched like she'd struck him. It's not about trust. It's exactly about trust. You brought me here. You said you wanted a partner. Now Eleanor's calling your bluff, and you have to decide if you actually meant it. Silence stretched between them. Through the windows, Clara could see the valley, the mill, the forest, the kingdom Luke had built and was fighting to protect. She understood now why he'd been so desperate for someone who would stay. He'd been preparing for this battle, and he couldn't fight it alone. Finally, Luke nodded. All right, we do this together. But if at any point it becomes too much, if you want to back out, I won't. You don't know that. No, Clara agreed. But I'm choosing to try anyway. Isn't that what courage is? Doing things that scare you because the alternative is worse. Margaret made a sound that might have been approval. I'll write up a list of what she needs to know. Etiquette, current events, the major families and their allegiances. We'll need to get her properly fitted for a gown, which means a trip to Granite Falls and probably Denver. I'll arrange it, Luke said, and I'll need to send telegrams to some allies, see if anyone can provide cover at the reception. Clara's head was spinning. What kind of cover? The kind where respected people publicly acknowledge you, treat you as legitimate. If the governor's wife speaks to you, for instance, it legitimizes you to everyone watching. Luke moved to his desk, already thinking strategically. But that requires calling in favors, and I don't have many in Denver society. I've made a point of avoiding it. What about your contracts, the railroad men? Surely some of them owe you consideration. Business relationships don't always translate to social ones, but it's worth trying. Luke pulled out stationery. Margaret, start Clara's lessons tonight. Focus on the basics first. Forms of address, table manners, how to navigate a formal event. I'll handle the logistics. Margaret nodded. Come on, Clara. We have work to do. Clara followed Margaret upstairs, her mind reeling. 3 weeks to transform from a frontier nobody into someone who could hold her own among Denver's elite. 3 weeks to learn a lifetime of social graces she'd never needed before. 3 weeks to prove she was more than what Eleanor Grayson thought she was. They worked through dinner, Margaret drilling Clara on the hierarchy of formal address. Sir and Madam for strangers, Lord and Lady for titled visitors, if any attended, Mrs. and Miss based on martial status and age. How to introduce people. Higher rank always introduced first. How to accept or decline a dance. How to make polite conversation without revealing too much. The key, Margaret explained, is to let them talk. Society people love nothing more than talking about themselves. Ask intelligent questions, appear fascinated by their answers, and they'll think you're delightful even if you barely say 10 words all evening. That seems manipulative. It's survival. You're walking into a room full of people who've been training for these events since childhood. They know every subtle insult, every backhanded compliment, every way to make someone feel small without saying anything overtly rude. Your best defense is to be pleasant, gracious, and impossible to ruffle. Clara practiced phrases Margaret taught her. How lovely to meet you. You're too kind. I'd be delighted to hear more about that. Each one feeling foreign in her mouth, like speaking a language she'd never learned. Luke appeared around 9, looking exhausted. I've sent 5 telegrams, called in every favor I have. We'll see who responds. Margaret excused herself, leaving Clara and Luke alone. He sank into a chair by the fireplace, staring at the flames. I'm sorry, he said finally. You keep apologizing, because I keep putting you in impossible situations. He looked at her. When I offered you marriage, I told you the truth about the isolation and the hardship, but I didn't prepare you for Eleanor, for the fact that marrying me would make you a target. Clara sat across from him. Did you know she'd come after us like this? I knew she'd be angry. I didn't know she'd be this aggressive. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. My father and Eleanor never got along. He thought she was grasping and mercenary. She thought he was a fool for choosing sustainable forestry over maximum profit. When he died, she expected me to see things her way. When I didn't, she started looking for leverage. And Victoria? What's her role in this? Luke's expression went carefully blank. Victoria and I courted briefly years ago, before Sarah. It didn't work out. She wanted someone who'd live in Denver and play society games. I wanted to be here. We parted ways. Does she know that? Because the way she looked at you tonight suggested she thinks you're still an option. She knows. She just doesn't accept it. Luke stood pacing. Eleanor's been pushing the match for years. A marriage between Victoria and me would merge Ashworth's railroad interests with our timber operation. Eleanor would control both through Victoria. It's been her endgame since before Sarah died. And now I'm in the way. Now you're inconvenient, which makes you a problem to be eliminated. He stopped pacing, looking at Clara with something like admiration. You stood up to her. Most people don't. They smile and acquiesce and let Eleanor walk all over them. I've dealt with bullies before. Mr. Henderson was basically the Red Hollow version of your aunt. Same tactics, smaller stage. Henderson's a small-town store owner. Eleanor's a major shareholder in a company worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. She has real power. Power she's using to threaten your livelihood and attack your marriage. Clara stood, moving to face him. Luke, I meant what I said. I'm not backing down. If we have to go to Denver and play their games, we'll play. And we'll win. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll try my hardest, that I won't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. She took a breath. You asked me once what I wanted from you. Honesty, I said, and a real partnership. This is what partnership means, facing the hard things together instead of alone. Luke reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand. His was warm, rough from work, steady despite everything. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. He almost smiled. Fair enough. Then we fight. Together. The next morning, preparations began in earnest. Margaret produced a list 3 pages long of things Clara needed to know. History of major Denver families, current political climate, recent scandals and who was involved, the governor's policy positions, which topics were safe conversation and which were social landmines. Clara studied like her life depended on it, because in a way, it did. She memorized names and faces from newspapers Margaret had saved, learned the difference between old money and new money, and why that distinction mattered. Practiced her posture, shoulders back, chin level, movements graceful rather than hurried. Luke drilled her on business topics, the state of the timber industry, railroad expansion plans, territory politics. He explained the relationships between his company and the larger economic forces at play, making sure she understood enough to hold an intelligent conversation if asked. Don't pretend to know more than you do, he warned. These men will test you. If you overreach, they'll tear you apart. But if you ask smart questions and listen well, they'll respect you. What about the women? Different game entirely. They'll judge you on appearance, manners, and social connections. Margaret's better equipped to help with that. The telegram responses started arriving. Most were polite refusals or vague promises to try to attend, but 2 were solidly positive. A railroad executive named Carmichael, who owed Luke for favorable contract terms. And surprisingly, a letter from the governor's wife herself, responding to a carefully worded request Luke had sent. Mrs. Harrison says she's looking forward to meeting you, Luke read, surprise evident in his voice. She's heard about the sustainable forestry practices and wants to discuss conservation efforts. That's good, right? That's very good. If Ellen Harrison publicly engages with you, it signals approval. The other women will follow her lead. He set down the letter. I didn't think she'd respond. She usually stays out of business politics. Maybe she's tired of business politics. Clara had read about Ellen Harrison, a former teacher who'd married the territorial governor, and reportedly maintained strong opinions about education and land management. Or maybe she actually cares about conservation. Either way, it's a strategic advantage we didn't have yesterday. 5 days before the reception, they made the trip to Denver. Luke, Clara, and Margaret rode together in a hired coach, the journey taking 2 full days even on maintained roads. Clara watched the landscape change from mountain wilderness to settled farmland to the sprawling edges of civilization. Denver was overwhelming. Buildings 3 and 4 stories tall, streets packed with wagons and pedestrians, noise and smoke, and the press of humanity. Clara had visited once as a child and remembered being awed. Now she felt that same awe, mixed with dread. They stayed at a hotel that made Luke's estate look rustic by comparison. Crystal chandeliers, carpeted hallways, dining rooms where people dressed for dinner like it was a theatrical performance, Margaret marched Clara straight to the city's finest dressmaker, a French woman named Madame Bouchard, who looked at Clara like she was a particularly challenging raw material. "She has good bones," Madame Bouchard announced in accented English. "But we must work with what time we have. 3 dresses, one for the reception, one for afternoon calls if necessary, one for travel. The reception gown must be spectacular, something that makes a statement. Something that says she belongs," Margaret corrected. "No, no, no," Madame Bouchard waved dismissively. "If we try to make her blend in, she will look like a poor copy. Instead, we make her distinctive. We make them notice her for the right reasons." She pulled out fabric samples, silks and satins and jewel tones. "Your coloring is excellent for strong colors. None of this pale pink nonsense. We do deep green, perhaps, or sapphire blue, something that makes your eyes vivid." Clara stood like a doll while Madame Bouchard and her assistants measured, pinned, and discussed her like she wasn't present. Margaret supervised, making suggestions that were either accepted or dismissed with equal fervor. By the time they finished, Clara's head was pounding. But Madame Bouchard had promised the gowns would be ready in 3 days, which seemed impossible, but apparently money made impossible things happen. Luke was waiting at the hotel when they returned. "How did it go?" "I've been poked with more pins than a pincushion and discussed like I'm a particularly stubborn horse that needs breaking," Clara said. "Otherwise, fine." He smiled, a real one that made him look years younger. "Welcome to Denver's society. It doesn't get better from here." That evening, Luke took Clara to dinner at the hotel restaurant, another test, she realized, of her ability to navigate formal dining. He coached her quietly on which utensil to use, how to pace herself with the courses, how to make polite conversation with the waiter without being overly familiar. Clara felt like she was walking a tightrope. One wrong move and she'd confirm everything Eleanor had said about her being unsuitable. But she made it through dinner without major disaster, even managing to discuss territorial politics with an older couple at the next table who'd overheard Luke's name and introduced themselves. Back in their rooms, separate, of course, maintaining the careful distance they'd established, Clara found she couldn't sleep. Tomorrow they had appointments with Luke's business contacts. The day after, a tea with several society wives Margaret had arranged through old connections. Then the final fitting for the gowns. Then the reception itself. 4 days. 4 days to prove she deserved to be here. 4 days to protect Luke's company and their marriage from Eleanor's attacks. Clara stood at the window, looking out at Denver's gas-lit streets, and tried to feel brave. Mostly, she just felt terrified. A soft knock at her door. Luke stood in the hallway, still dressed, but his tie loosened. "Can't sleep either. Too much running through my head. Come to my room. I want to show you something." She followed him, curiosity overriding propriety. His room was larger than hers, with a sitting area where papers were spread across a desk. Luke gathered them, handing them to Clara. "These are letters," he said. "From the workers. 43 men wrote to say they're grateful I didn't sell out to Eleanor's expansion plan, that they'd rather work for someone who cares about the forest and their safety than someone who just sees profit margins." Clara read through them, touched by the rough penmanship and honest words. "They trust you. They trust that I'll fight for what's right, even when it's hard." He met her eyes. "I need you to know that whatever happens at this reception, whatever Eleanor throws at us, those men are why I'm fighting. Not for money or pride. For them, for the valley, for building something that lasts." "I know," Clara said softly. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." Luke stepped closer, close enough that Clara could feel the warmth of him. "When this is over, assuming we survive it, I want to renegotiate our arrangement." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want this to be a real marriage. Not just a partnership, not just convenience." His voice was rough. "I know you didn't sign up for that. I know I brought you here under false pretenses, and you have every right to keep me at arm's length. But Clara, you've proven yourself a dozen times over. You're smart and brave, and you don't back down even when you should. And I—" He stopped, looking frustrated. Clara waited, her heart pounding. "I'm falling in love with you," he finally said. "I didn't plan to. I didn't think I could after Sarah. But you're not Sarah, you're yourself. And I want a chance to see where this could go if we're both willing to try." Clara's breath caught. She thought about the past 2 weeks, about learning to trust this difficult, complicated man, about seeing him care for his workers and his land with fierce devotion. about the way he'd never once condescended to her, even when teaching her things she didn't know. "Ask me again after the reception," she said. "After we've survived Eleanor and proven we can weather the storm. Then I'll give you my answer." Luke nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He walked her back to her room, and this time when he bid her goodnight, he kissed her hand. A small gesture, old-fashioned and sweet, that made Clara's chest feel tight. She lay awake a long time, thinking about love and trust and the strange path that had brought her here. Tomorrow, they'd face Denver society. In 4 days, they'd face Eleanor's final challenge. And after that, Clara would have to decide what kind of future she wanted. But tonight, for this moment, she let herself feel something close to hope. The next 3 days blurred into a parade of strategic meetings and social maneuvering that left Clara's head spinning. Luke introduced her to railroad executives who assessed her like livestock at auction, their handshakes perfunctory and their questions designed to expose her ignorance. She smiled through each interrogation, remembered Margaret's coaching, and let them talk themselves into believing she was harmless. The tea with society wives was worse. 6 women gathered in a hotel parlor, each one dressed in afternoon finery that probably cost more than Clara's father had earned in a year. They spoke in coded language Clara was still learning to decipher, discussing charitable works that were actually social hierarchies and community concerns that translated to gossip. Margaret sat beside her like a guardian angel, deflecting the worst of the probing questions. But Clara felt every measuring glance, every subtle dismissal. These women had decided who she was before she'd even walked in the room. Only one showed any genuine warmth. A younger woman named Caroline Mitchell, perhaps 25, with kind eyes and a nervous habit of twisting her wedding ring. She'd approached Clara as the tea was ending. "Don't let them intimidate you," Caroline whispered. "They did the same to me when I married Robert. My father was a shopkeeper, which apparently makes me barely civilized in their eyes. You'll survive this. Just remember that their opinions matter far less than they think they do." Clara squeezed her hand gratefully. "Thank you. Besides," Caroline added with a slight smile, "I heard you telling Mrs. Hartford about sustainable forestry practices. She actually looked interested, which I've never seen before. You're doing better than you think." But Clara knew better than to feel confident. The real test was still coming. The day before the reception, Madame Bouchard's shop delivered the gowns. Clara stood in her hotel room as Margaret helped her into the reception dress, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something close to excitement. The gown was deep emerald silk that caught the light like water. The bodice was fitted perfectly with delicate beading across the shoulders that sparkled when she moved. The skirt fell in elegant lines that made her look taller, more regal. Madame Bouchard had been right about the color. It made Clara's eyes vivid and her dark hair rich. Margaret stepped back, her expression softening. "You look like you belong in that dress, like it was made for who you actually are, not who you're pretending to be." Clara turned in front of the mirror, barely recognizing herself. "I don't feel like myself." "Good, because yourself is a frightened girl from Red Hollow. This woman," Margaret gestured at Clara's reflection, "this woman can face Eleanor Grayson and win." A knock at the connecting door. Luke entered without waiting for permission, then stopped dead when he saw Clara. "Is it all right?" Clara asked, suddenly uncertain. Luke's voice came out rough. "You're beautiful. It's the dress." "It's not the dress." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "Clara, you're going to walk into that reception and every person there is going to see what I see. Someone strong and real and completely remarkable." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm terrified." "I know, so am I." He took her hand. "But we do this together. And if anyone tries to hurt you, they'll have to go through me first." Margaret cleared her throat. "Touching as this is, we need to finish preparing. Clara needs her hair properly arranged. And Luke, you need to not rumple that dress before tomorrow night." Luke released Clara's hand reluctantly. "Tomorrow, then." Tomorrow. That night, Clara barely slept. She lay in the darkness, rehearsing everything she'd learned. How to address a governor. How to decline a dance without giving offense. How to navigate conversations about politics without revealing her actual opinions. How to smile through insults disguised as compliments. When dawn came, she rose and dressed mechanically, her stomach in knots. Margaret arrived early, bringing tea and toast Clara couldn't eat. "You'll be fine," Margaret said firmly. "Remember, you're not there to impress them. You're there to survive them. Big difference." The reception began at 7. Luke called for Clara at 6:30, looking devastating in formal evening wear that transformed him from mountain man to society gentleman. His hair was properly trimmed, his beard shaped, his bearing confident, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but let's go anyway." The governor's mansion blazed with light against the evening sky. Carriages lined the circular drive, depositing passengers in elaborate finery. Clara watched wealthy women glide toward the entrance, their jewels catching the lamplight, their laughter carrying on the cold air. Luke helped her down from their carriage, his hand steady on her arm. "Stay close to me. I'll handle the introductions. You just smile and be yourself." "Which self? The mountain girl or the society lady?" "The one who stood up to Eleanor. That's the only version of you that matters tonight." They climbed the steps together. The entrance hall was magnificent. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of territorial history lining the walls. Servants in livery moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. A string quartet played from somewhere deeper in the house. And everywhere people. Men in tailored suits, women in gowns that made Clara's dress look almost modest, everyone talking and laughing with the easy confidence of belonging. Eleanor spotted them immediately. She stood near the center of the main ballroom, holding court like a queen. Victoria was beside her, stunning in ice blue silk that matched her cold beauty. Richard Ashworth and his lawyers flanked them like an honor guard. "Luke, darling," Eleanor called out, her voice carrying across the room. "How wonderful that you could make it, and you brought your little project. How brave of her to attempt this." Heads turned, conversations paused. Clara felt the weight of dozens of eyes assessing her, judging her, finding her wanting. She forced her spine straight and her chin up. "Aunt Eleanor," Luke said coolly, "you're looking well. Scheming must agree with you." Eleanor's smile sharpened. "I prefer to call it strategic planning. You should try it sometime. It might prevent you from making impulsive decisions you'll regret." "I regret very few of my decisions, especially the recent ones." Before Eleanor could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Luke Grayson, as I live and breathe. I heard you'd emerged from your mountain fortress, but I didn't believe it." A tall man approached, probably 40, with sharp eyes and an easy smile. He clapped Luke on the shoulder with genuine warmth. "Carmichael," Luke said, relief evident in his voice. "Good to see you." "Likewise. And this must be Mrs. Grayson." Carmichael took Clara's hand, his bow formal, but his expression kind. "Your husband's been keeping secrets. I'm James Carmichael, Union Pacific Railroad. Luke and I have done business together for years." "It's lovely to meet you," Clara said, grateful for the practiced phrase. "I've been meaning to discuss those timber contracts," Carmichael continued, smoothly drawing them away from Eleanor. "The quality of your last shipment was exceptional. We're considering expanding our partnership." He guided them toward a quieter corner, keeping up a stream of business talk that effectively shielded them from immediate social assault. Clara caught Luke's grateful glance. "Thank you," Luke murmured. "Don't mention it. Anyone Eleanor Grayson is gunning for must be doing something right." Carmichael lowered his voice. "Word of warning, she's been spreading rumors all week, painting your marriage as a scandal. You'll need more than my support to counter it." As if summoned, a servant appeared at Clara's elbow. "Mrs. Grayson, Mrs. Harrison requests your presence." Clara's heart jumped. The governor's wife. The woman whose approval could legitimize her to everyone watching. Luke squeezed her hand once. "Go. I'll be right here." Clara followed the servant through the crowded ballroom, acutely aware of the attention tracking her movement. They reached a seating area where an elegant woman in her 50s sat surrounded by several other ladies. Ellen Harrison had intelligent eyes and a warm smile that didn't quite hide her assessment. "Mrs. Grayson, how lovely to finally meet you. Please, sit." Clara sat, arranging her skirts carefully. The other women watched with predatory interest. "I've been reading about your husband's forestry practices," Ellen continued. "This selective harvesting approach, it's quite innovative, isn't it?" This was safe ground. Clara had studied this extensively. "It's based on long-term sustainability rather than short-term profit. By harvesting only mature trees and leaving the younger growth, the forest maintains its watershed function and continues producing quality timber indefinitely. How refreshing, Most timber operations seem determined to destroy their own future. Ellen's eyes sharpened. I understand there's been some pressure to abandon these practices in favor of more aggressive expansion. Clara chose her words carefully. There are always people who prioritize immediate returns over sustainable management. My husband believes, and I agree, that stewardship is more valuable than extraction. Even when it means lower profits? Profits mean nothing if they come at the cost of destroying the resource itself. That's not business strategy. That's just greed with accounting. One of the other women gasped softly. Ellen Harrison's eyebrows rose, but her smile widened. Well said. It's rare to hear such straightforward opinions in these circles. Forgive me if I've spoken too bluntly, Clara said, remembering Margaret's warnings about being too opinionated. Not at all. I find honesty refreshing. Ellen leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Mrs. Grayson, what's your opinion on the proposed territory education reforms? Clara's mind raced. She'd read about this in the newspapers Margaret had made her study. I think universal education is essential for territorial development, though the funding mechanisms being proposed seem to disproportionately burden rural communities while serving urban centers. Exactly my concern. Ellen's approval was evident. The governor and I have been discussing this extensively. Perhaps you'd be willing to share your perspective with him? The rural viewpoint is often underrepresented in these policy discussions. Before Clara could respond, Eleanor's voice cut across the conversation like a knife. How charming to see you taking an interest in politics, dear. Though I'm sure Ellen would prefer to hear from people with actual expertise rather than a frontier girl playing dress-up. The room went silent. Ellen Harrison's expression turned to ice. I beg your pardon, Eleanor? I simply mean that complex policy matters require educated understanding. No offense to Mrs. Grayson, of course. Eleanor's smile was vicious. But she's barely been out of the wilderness for a month. What could she possibly know about governance? Clara felt heat rising in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to defend herself, to lash out. But Margaret's voice echoed in her mind. Don't let them see you rattled. That's what they want. She stood slowly, meeting Eleanor's gaze with calm she didn't feel. You're right that I lack formal education in policy matters. But I've spent the past month learning every aspect of a successful business operation. I can discuss timber contracts, railroad logistics, labor management, and sustainable resource development with anyone in this room. What I lack in formal credentials, I make up for in practical experience and willingness to learn. How industrious, Victoria interjected, her tone dripping condescension, playing at being a businesswoman. It must be such a novelty for Luke to have someone pretending to understand his work. I'm not pretending anything. I review contracts, manage supply logistics, and coordinate with 40 workers who depend on sound decision-making. That's not playing. That's partnership. Eleanor's eyes glittered. Partnership? Is that what you're calling this arrangement? Because there are other words for it. Words that describe young women who see wealthy men as opportunities. The insult hung in the air like poison. Clara heard gasps from the surrounding crowd. This was the moment Eleanor had been building toward. The public accusation that Clara had married for money. That she was nothing more than an opportunist who'd trapped Luke. Luke appeared at Clara's side, his face dark with anger. Careful, Aunt. Oh, I'm being very careful. Unlike you, apparently. Eleanor's voice rose, ensuring the entire ballroom could hear. Marrying some desperate girl from nowhere, giving her access to company finances, making her a partner in decisions she's unqualified to make. It reeks of impaired judgment, the kind of impairment that might require shareholder intervention. That's enough, Luke said coldly. Is it? Because I have documentation here that raises serious questions about this marriage. Eleanor pulled papers from her ridiculous small purse. A marriage certificate filed 3 weeks ago. No courtship, no announcement, no prenuptial agreement, just a sudden wedding in a backwater town to a woman whose family was facing financial ruin. One might almost think it was a transaction rather than a romance. Clara's blood went cold. Eleanor had investigated everything, had probably talked to people in Red Hollow, had gathered all the details that made their marriage look exactly as calculating as she was painting it. You don't know anything about our marriage, Clara said quietly. Don't I? I know Luke showed up in Red Hollow right when your father's debts came due. I know he paid off those debts the day after you married. I know you'd worked in a general store for poverty wages and suddenly found yourself mistress of a mountain estate. Eleanor's smile was triumphant. That's not romance, dear. That's commerce. You think I married him for money? Clara's voice shook, but not with fear, with fury. I married him because I had no other choice. Because my father was dying and we were losing everything, and Luke offered a way out. Yes, it was practical. Yes, it was desperate. But you want to know what else it was? She stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and Eleanor. The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama. It was brave. I married a stranger and followed him into the mountains with no guarantee of what I'd find. I learned a business I knew nothing about. I proved myself to 40 men who had every reason to doubt me. I came to this reception knowing people like you would judge me, would try to destroy me, and I came anyway. Not because I'm playing at being Luke's wife, because I am his wife, and I will not let you or anyone else tear that down. Eleanor's expression flickered. Surprise, then respect, then renewed calculation. Brave words, but words don't change facts. You married into wealth. I married into work, Clara interrupted, into responsibility and partnership and learning things that terrify me because they matter. You want to talk about impaired judgment? Let's talk about your expansion proposal, clear-cutting adjacent valleys to triple output. Do you have any idea what that would do to the watershed, to the long-term viability of the forest? That's business. That's destruction for profit. And when those valleys are stripped bare and can't regenerate, when the erosion destroys the river systems and the timber quality drops, what then? You'll have made your money and moved on to the next resource to exploit, but the land will be ruined, the workers will be unemployed, and the company Luke's father built on sustainable principles will be just another failed extraction operation. Clara's voice rang across the ballroom. She was vaguely aware that everyone was listening now, that she'd abandoned all pretense of polite society behavior, but she couldn't stop. You call me unqualified. I know more about the actual operation than you do. I've walked every acre of that valley. I've watched the harvesting process. I've reviewed 3 years of production data, and I can tell you exactly why selective harvesting produces better long-term returns than clear-cutting. You want numbers? I'll give you numbers. She pulled from memory everything Luke had taught her, rattling off production statistics, quality grades, contract terms. The crowd was silent now, watching this frontier girl demolish Eleanor's arguments with facts and figures. Governor Harrison himself had moved closer, his expression interested. Ellen Harrison was smiling. Eleanor's face had gone pale with rage. This is absurd. She's been coached. She's been educated, Luke said firmly, by me. Because, unlike you, Aunt Eleanor, I believe in building things rather than just profiting from them. Clara's right about everything she said. Your expansion plan would destroy the forests and the company. I won't allow it. You may not have a choice. Richard Ashworth stepped forward, his lawyers flanking him. We've filed for a formal shareholder review. If we can prove mismanagement or impaired judgment, on what grounds? Governor Harrison's voice cut through the argument. Forgive me for interrupting, but I've been listening to this young woman speak, and I hear nothing but sound business sense and genuine concern for sustainable resource management. What exactly is the mismanagement being alleged? Richard faltered. The marriage was sudden and potentially motivated by two people finding a mutually beneficial arrangement? How is that different from half the marriages in this room? The governor looked around pointedly. Show of hands. How many of you married purely for love with no consideration of financial security or social advantage? Uncomfortable silence. Clara saw several society wives exchange glances. That's what I thought. Harrison turned back to Richard. Unless you have evidence of actual fraud or malfeasance, a shareholder review based on disapproval of someone's marriage seems like a waste of everyone's time and money. There's also the question of her influence on business decisions, Eleanor interjected desperately. She has no experience, no education. She has practical knowledge and appears to be learning rapidly, Ellen Harrison said coolly. I've been discussing policy with her, Eleanor, and I found her insights valuable, more valuable than many educated people who speak from theory rather than experience. Besides, the governor added, I'm rather interested in this sustainable forestry approach. The territory's been dealing with the aftermath of clear-cutting operations that destroyed watersheds and left nothing but erosion. If Mr. Grayson has developed methods that maintain forest health while still producing profit, that's something worth supporting, not sabotaging. He looked at Luke. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss this further. and I'd like your wife to attend. Her perspective on rural economic development could be valuable for our education reform discussions. Clara's mind reeled. The governor of the territory wanted to meet with her, wanted her input on policy. She'd come here expecting to be torn apart, and instead she'd somehow turned the situation completely around. Eleanor looked like she'd been struck. Victoria's perfect composure had cracked, showing raw anger underneath. Richard and his lawyers were conferring in urgent whispers. Luke's hand found Clara's, squeezing gently. She looked up at him and saw pride mixed with amazement. "I believe," Ellen Harrison said into the stunned silence, "that this calls for a toast to Mrs. Grayson, who's proven tonight that courage and intelligence matter more than pedigree." Several people raised their glasses. Not everyone. Clara could see plenty of disapproving faces in the crowd, but enough that Eleanor's social assassination had clearly failed. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People approached Clara with new interest, asking questions about the timber operation, about life in the mountains, about her opinions on everything from railroad expansion to women's education. She answered as best she could, remembering Margaret's coaching but also speaking from her own genuine experience. Caroline Mitchell found her during a quiet moment. "You were magnificent. I've never seen anyone stand up to Eleanor Grayson like that. I probably shouldn't have lost my temper." "Are you joking? You spoke truth to power. Half the people here have wanted to do that for years but didn't have the courage." Caroline smiled. "You've made an enemy, but you've also earned respect. That's worth more in the long run." As the reception wound down, Luke guided Clara toward the exit. They'd stayed long enough, made their point. Eleanor was huddled with her allies, clearly planning her next move, but the immediate crisis had been averted. Outside, the cold air was a relief after the stifling ballroom. Clara's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Luke helped her into their carriage, then climbed in beside her. "You were incredible," he said. "I was angry. I probably said too much." "You said exactly what needed to be said. You didn't just defend yourself, you defended our entire approach to the business. You made Eleanor look like the greedy opportunist she is." He took her hand. "Clara, I know I asked you to wait until after tonight to answer my question, but I need you to know what you did in there, the courage you showed, the way you fought for us. Luke?" Clara turned to face him. "Ask me again." "What?" "Your question from the other night. Ask me again." Luke's expression softened. "I want this to be a real marriage, not just partnership or convenience. I want a future with you, Clara. I want to build something together that's ours, not just what circumstances forced us into. I'm asking if you want that too." Clara thought about the past month, about leaving Red Hollow to save her father, about discovering Luke had lied by omission but had given her opportunities she'd never imagined, about learning to run a business, to stand up to people like Eleanor, to find strength she hadn't known she possessed. She thought about Luke teaching her patiently, trusting her with real responsibility, looking at her like she mattered, about the way he'd stood beside her tonight, proud rather than protective, letting her fight her own battle while making it clear he was there if she needed him. "Yes," she said simply. "I want that too." Luke pulled her close, kissing her for the first time. It was gentle and fierce all at once, full of promise and relief and something that felt dangerously close to love. When they finally broke apart, Clara was breathless. "We still have problems. Eleanor's not going to give up." "No, but we'll face them together, really together this time." Luke smiled. "You turned the governor into an ally tonight. That's going to make Eleanor's legal challenges much harder. And you've proven to everyone watching that you're not some helpless mountain girl. You're my equal partner. I'm still learning. We're both still learning. That's what partnership means." The carriage rolled through Denver's gas-lit streets, carrying them back to the hotel. Clara leaned against Luke's shoulder, exhausted but oddly content. They'd survived the ballroom battle. They'd proven themselves to the people who mattered, and they'd found something real in the process. Tomorrow, they'd return to the valley, to the work of actually running the operation and dealing with Eleanor's inevitable next move. But tonight, Clara let herself simply feel victorious. She'd walked into that reception as the poor girl from Red Hollow, the questionable wife who'd married for money. She was leaving as Clara Grayson, business partner and policy advisor, someone who'd earned her place through courage and capability rather than pedigree or pretense. It was, she thought, a significant improvement. The journey back to Winter Ridge took 3 days, but this time Clara noticed things she'd missed on the brutal ride in. The way the forest changed as they climbed higher, pine giving way to spruce, the distant peaks that looked like teeth against the sky, the absolute silence that settled once they left civilization behind, broken only by wind and the horse's steady rhythm. Luke rode beside her now, instead of ahead, pointing out landmarks and talking about the valley in a way he hadn't before, like she'd earned the right to really understand it. "My father found this place by accident," he said as they crested the final ridge. "He was surveying for a railroad route that never got built, saw the valley and the forest, and understood what it could be. Spent 2 years filing claims and buying up surrounding land before anyone else realized what he had." Clara looked down at the valley spread before them, the river catching afternoon light like mercury. "He built something that matters. He built something that lasts, or at least that's supposed to last." Luke's expression darkened. "Eleanor's not done. The governor's support helps, but she still owns 30%. She can still make trouble. Then we deal with trouble when it comes." They rode down into the valley as the sun set, painting everything gold and purple. Workers stopped to wave as they passed the mill. Jamie ran out of the stables, grinning wide. "You're back! Did you survive Denver? Peterson said city folk would eat you alive." "We survived," Clara said, dismounting with significantly more grace than she'd managed 3 weeks ago. "Peterson owes me $5 if he bet against us." "He definitely did. This is going to be great." Margaret was waiting on the porch, her usually stern face showing relief. "Thank heavens. I've been imagining every possible disaster. How bad was it?" "Bad," Luke admitted. Then Clara stood up in front of half of Denver society and demolished Eleanor's arguments with forestry statistics. "Now the governor wants to meet with us about conservation policy." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "You're joking." "I'm really not," Clara said. "It was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I'm still not sure which." "Probably both. The best moments usually are." Margaret ushered them inside. "Cook's been preparing a feast. He was convinced you'd come back defeated and needing comfort food. Now I suppose it's a victory dinner instead." The house felt different to Clara now, less like Sarah's museum and more like home. She'd been gone less than a week, but she'd missed the particular silence of the valley, the smell of pine smoke, the way the wooden floors creaked in specific spots. That night at dinner, Luke filled Margaret and Cook in on everything that had happened. Cook kept interrupting with colorful commentary about what he'd like to do to Luke Grayson. Margaret listened with the sharp attention of someone planning strategies. "She'll regroup," Margaret warned. "Eleanor's not the type to accept defeat gracefully. She'll look for new angles, new ways to undermine you." "Let her try," Clara said. "We have the governor's support, and we proved I'm not just playing at being Luke's partner. What else can she do?" The answer came 2 weeks later, delivered by a courier who'd ridden hard from Denver. Luke opened the official documents in his study while Clara looked over his shoulder. "A formal audit," Luke said flatly. "Eleanor's triggered a clause in the company bylaws that allows minority shareholders to demand a full financial audit if they suspect irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "Any kind. It's a fishing expedition. She's hoping to find something, anything, that can be used to claim mismanagement." He threw the papers down. "This is going to tie up months of time and cost a fortune in legal fees. And if the auditors find even minor bookkeeping errors, Eleanor can use them to argue for restructuring." Clara picked up the papers, reading through the legal language. "How clean are your books?" "Very clean. My father was meticulous, and I followed his example. But auditors can make problems out of nothing if they're looking hard enough. A late payment here, an unusual expense there. In the wrong light, normal business operations can look suspicious. Then we make sure they see it in the right light." Clara set down the papers. "We organize everything, document every decision, and give them no room to twist facts into fiction. You said your father was meticulous. Let's use that." Over the next month, they lived in the study. Every contract, every invoice, every payroll record from the past 5 years got reviewed, organized, and cross-referenced. Clara discovered she had a talent for finding patterns in numbers, catching the story the finances told about how Luke ran the operation. She also discovered problems, not malfeasance, but inefficiencies that could be exploited by hostile auditors. "You're paying for equipment maintenance twice," she said one evening, pointing to entries in 2 different ledgers. once from the general operating fund and once from equipment reserves. It's not fraud, but it makes your expenses look inflated. Luke leaned over to look. Those are different things. General maintenance versus capital improvements. I understand that, but they're not categorized clearly. An auditor looking for problems could claim you're double billing or inflating costs to hide profits. She pulled out a blank ledger. We need to reorganize the entire accounting system. Make it so clean and clear that there's no room for misinterpretation. That's going to take weeks. Good thing we have weeks before the auditors arrive. They worked late into the nights, Clara learning accounting principles on the fly, while Luke provided context for every expense and decision. Slowly, a clearer picture of the operation emerged. Luke paid his workers 15% above standard rates. He invested heavily in safety equipment that other operations considered unnecessary expenses. He maintained larger reserves than most companies because he'd seen what happened when unexpected problems arose and there was no buffer. Every choice that made Eleanor's profit-focused allies see mismanagement was actually evidence of sustainable, worker-focused leadership. This is the story we need to tell, Clara said, laying out the reorganized ledgers. Not just that the books are clean, but why they look the way they do. Every expense that seems high has a reason rooted in long-term thinking. Show the auditors that, and Eleanor's narrative falls apart. Luke looked at her work, then at her. When did you become a financial strategist? When I realized that numbers tell stories just like words do, and we need to make sure our story is the one that gets heard. The auditors arrived in early March, 2 men from a Denver firm with the joyless demeanor of people who'd spent their lives looking for other people's mistakes. They set up in the study and began their examination with the kind of thoroughness that would have been admirable if it wasn't so clearly hostile. Clara made sure they were comfortable, that they had everything they needed, and that every question was answered completely and immediately. She'd learned from the governor's reception that controlling the narrative meant controlling the information flow. By the end of the first week, she could see their frustration. The books were too clean. Every expense was documented and justified. The reorganization she and Luke had done made it impossible to claim confusion or irregularity. Your safety equipment costs are quite high, the lead auditor noted, his tone suggesting accusation. Yes, Claire agreed, because we value our workers' lives more than we value cutting corners. Every piece of safety equipment has documentation showing how it prevented injuries or deaths. Would you like to review those records as well? The auditor's expression soured, but he couldn't argue with documented life-saving measures. On the 10th day, Peterson appeared at the house with news that changed everything. Mrs. Grayson, there's been an accident at the North Timber site. Clara's stomach dropped. How bad? Cable snapped during a haul. Could have killed 3 men, but the safety harnesses you insisted we buy last month caught them. They've got bruises and Thompson might have a cracked rib, but they're alive. They're saying those harnesses saved their lives. Clara looked at the auditors who'd been listening. The harnesses that cost $800 and showed up in your review as questionable expenses? The lead auditor had the grace to look uncomfortable. Luke arrived from the mill a few minutes later, having already checked on the injured men. They're shaken but fine. The harnesses worked exactly as designed. Without them, he didn't finish the sentence. Without them, you'd have 3 dead workers, and Eleanor would be attending their funerals while claiming you'd mismanaged the operation, Clara said quietly. Instead, you have 3 alive workers because you spent money on their safety. The auditors completed their review 2 days later. Their report was terse and professional, finding no evidence of financial irregularity or mismanagement. The high expenses were justified by documented safety improvements and long-term sustainability practices. The accounting was thorough and transparent. Eleanor's fishing expedition had caught nothing, but victory came with an unexpected cost. A letter arrived from Red Hollow, forwarded from the Denver hotel. Clara knew from the handwriting what it said before she opened it. Her father had died peacefully in his sleep, with the Denver doctor present and no pain at the end. Mrs. Chen had been holding his hand. He'd asked her to tell Clara that he was proud, that he loved her, and that she should live the life she'd chosen without looking back. Clara read the letter twice, then walked out to the valley overlook where she could see the entire sweep of Winter Ridge. She stood there as the sun set, crying for the man who'd raised her and let her go, who'd trusted her to make impossible choices and supported her, even when it meant losing her. Luke found her as darkness fell. He didn't say anything, just wrapped his coat around her shoulders and stood beside her while she grieved. He got to die in his own home, Clara said finally. Because of what we did. Because I married you. That matters. It matters, Luke agreed, but I didn't get to say goodbye. No, and that's going to hurt for a long time. He pulled her closer. But he knew you loved him. That letter makes that clear. He died knowing you were safe and building something good. That's not nothing. Clara leaned into him, letting herself be held. I want to do something for him. Something that matters. Like what? I don't know yet, but something. The idea came to her 2 weeks later while reviewing contracts with Peterson. The workers' bunkhouses were functional but grim. Bare walls, narrow bunks, no privacy. Men lived there for months at a time with nothing personal, nothing comfortable. What if we rebuilt them? Clara asked Luke that evening. Made them actually livable instead of just functional. Individual rooms instead of open barracks. Windows. Real furniture. Give the men dignity instead of just shelter. Luke considered it. That's expensive. Probably $10,000 for materials and construction. We have the reserves, and you've seen the turnover rates for other operations. Men leave because the living conditions are miserable. If we make Winter Ridge a place where people actually want to stay, we'll have better workers and lower training costs. It's an investment that pays for itself. And it's the right thing to do, Luke added with a slight smile. Your father was a carpenter. This would honor that. Yes, it would. They broke ground in April. Luke hired additional carpenters from Denver and Granite Falls. Clara worked alongside them, learning from men who'd known her father's reputation and respected his craftsmanship. She couldn't build like Thomas Bennett had, but she could learn enough to understand quality work when she saw it. The new bunkhouses rose over the summer. Individual rooms with real beds, windows that let in light and air, common areas where men could gather. Storage for personal belongings. A separate building for bathing that wasn't just a freezing shed by the river. The workers watched the construction with growing amazement. Most had never worked for an operation that cared about their comfort. Peterson told Clara that men were requesting transfers from other timber companies, wanting to work for the outfit that treated employees like human beings instead of equipment. Eleanor made one more attempt in June, sending lawyers with a new proposal. She'd sell her shares to Luke for fair market value plus 20%, allowing him to buy her out completely. The catch was hidden in the fine print. The valuation would be based on projected earnings from her expansion plan, not actual current value. It would have bankrupted the operation to buy her out. Clara caught the trap during her review. She's trying to force you into a corner. Either accept the expansion plan or pay her based on earnings you'd only get from the expansion plan. Either way, she wins. Luke declined the offer publicly, making it clear that any future buyout would be based on actual earnings using current sustainable practices. Eleanor's lawyers threatened legal action. The governor's office quietly let it be known that territorial conservation grants might be available for operations demonstrating sustainable forestry practices. Eleanor finally accepted defeat in August, selling her shares to a consortium of smaller investors who'd been impressed by Clara's performance at the governor's reception. The new shareholders cared more about steady returns than maximum extraction. Luke maintained control, but now his board actually supported his approach instead of fighting it. Victoria Ashworth married Richard Brennan in September. The invitation to the wedding was formal and cold, obviously sent out of social obligation. Clara and Luke didn't attend. By October, the new bunkhouses were complete. Clara organized a celebration, working with Cook to prepare a feast that fed every worker in the valley. There were speeches about the new facilities, about safety improvements, about treating workers with dignity. But the moment Clara remembered most came after the formal celebration ended. An older logger named Hansen, who'd worked timber camps for 30 years, approached her with rough hands and rougher words. "I've been doing this work since I was 14, he said. Slept in places that weren't fit for animals. Lost friends to accidents that could have been prevented if anyone had cared enough to spend money on safety. I never thought I'd see an operation that actually gave a damn about the men doing the work." His voice cracked. "Your husband built something special here, but you made it better. You made it human. Thank you." Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just nodded, and Hansen gripped her shoulder once before walking away. That night, lying in bed beside Luke, the The marriage had become real in every sense now. Clara thought about how far she'd come. From the frightened girl signing a contract in Red Hollow to the woman workers thanked for making their lives better. From desperate survival to building something that mattered. "Do you ever regret it?" Luke asked in the darkness. "The way we started, the lies and manipulation." Was quiet, really considering it. "I regret that my father died. I regret not having more time with him. But the choice I made? Following you here?" She rolled over to face him. "No, because everything good in my life now came from that choice. You, this place, the work we're doing, none of it would exist if I'd stayed in Red Hollow and let fear make my decisions. Even knowing what you know now, that I could have just told you the truth from the start? Would I have believed you? If some stranger showed up claiming to be wealthy and offering marriage, I would have thought it was a con. The way you did it, letting me think you were just a mountain man, letting me choose based on what I thought was the worst-case scenario. It meant I came here prepared for hardship. Everything else was bonus." Luke pulled her closer. "You're kinder than I deserve." "Probably, but you're stuck with me anyway." Winter came early that year, closing the valley in snow and silence. Claire had dreaded the isolation, remembering what Luke had said about Sarah's decline, but she found she didn't mind it. There was always work to do, planning next year's operations, reviewing contracts, corresponding with the governor's office about conservation proposals. And there were the books in the library, long conversations by the fire, chess games where she finally started winning regularly. More than that, there was purpose. Clara wasn't just existing in the wilderness, she was building something. Every decision she and Luke made together was another brick in the foundation of something that would outlast them both. In December, a letter arrived from Caroline Mitchell. She and her husband were moving west, to Oregon, where he'd taken a position managing a shipping operation. The letter was warm and filled with news, but one paragraph stood out. "Everyone still talks about the governor's reception, about how you faced down Eleanor Grayson and won. You've become something of a legend among those of us who married into society rather than being born into it. You proved that courage matters more than pedigree. I'll always be grateful for that example." Clara showed the letter to Luke. "I didn't think I'd made that much of an impression." "You changed the conversation," he said, "made it acceptable to value substance over appearance. That matters more than you know." On Christmas Eve, they held another feast for the workers. Margaret had decorated the main house with pine boughs and candles. Cook had outdone himself with the meal. The men sang songs that were more enthusiastic than tuneful, and Jamie played fiddle badly but joyfully. Clara stood on the porch afterward, watching snow fall over the valley. The mill was dark for the holiday. The bunkhouses glowed with lamplight from men who'd chosen to stay here rather than return to towns that held nothing for them. The forest stretched out in every direction, protected and productive, a legacy that would endure. Luke joined her, handing her a cup of something hot and spiced. "I have something for you." He pulled out a small wooden box, clearly handmade. Clara opened it to find a delicate silver pin in the shape of a pine tree, with tiny stones she thought might be emeralds making up the needles. "It was my mother's," Luke said quietly. "My father commissioned it when they first moved to the valley. Said it represented their new life, their new beginning. I want you to have it, because you've given me a new beginning too." Clara's eyes burned. "Luke, I know I started this marriage all wrong, but you've made it into something right, something real. You're not Sarah's replacement. You're not a convenient solution to loneliness. You're my partner, my equal, and the reason I believe this valley has a future." He took her hand. "I love you, Clara. Not because you're useful or brave or good at business. Just because you're you." Clara kissed him, tasting spices and snow and the future they were building together. "I love you too, even though you're still terrible at romantic speeches." He laughed. "I'm working on it." "Don't. Your awkwardness is part of your charm." They stood together watching the valley. Two people who'd found each other through desperation and built something like love from the wreckage of their separate pasts. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messier and harder and more complicated than that. But it was real. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, the river ran high, and the forest woke green and ready. Clara and Luke planned the year's harvest, marking trees with Peterson and the crew leaders. The governor's conservation grants came through. providing funding for reforestation experiments and watershed protection. Eleanor sent a brief letter in March, acknowledging defeat with as much grace as she could muster. She would not interfere with the operation again. In return, she expected quarterly financial reports and professional courtesy. It was a truce, not a peace, but it was enough. One evening in late April, Clara stood in the study looking at the maps that covered one wall. Every section of the valley marked and documented, every decision visible in the lines and notations, the whole complicated machinery of building something that lasted. Margaret found her there. Still planning world domination? Just thinking about how much has changed. Clara traced a line marking the new reforestation area. A year ago, I was working in Henderson's store for poverty wages. Now I'm corresponding with the territorial governor about environmental policy. It's absurd. It's what you made possible by being brave when it mattered. Margaret moved to stand beside her. You know what your father would say if he could see this? Clara's throat tightened. What? That you've become exactly who you were meant to be. Not the person Red Hollow expected. Not the person circumstances tried to force you into. The person who was there all along, just waiting for the right opportunity. I miss him. Of course you do. That never stops. But look what you've built in his memory. Not just those bunkhouses, though they matter. You've created a place where people are valued, where work has dignity, where the land is protected for future generations. Margaret squeezed her shoulder. That's a legacy Thomas Bennett would be proud of. Clara wiped her eyes. When did you become sentimental? I've always been sentimental. I just hide it better than you do. That summer, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly. Missed courses, morning nausea, a tiredness that had nothing to do with work. Margaret confirmed it with the knowing eye of someone who'd seen it before. How do you feel about it? Margaret asked. Clara sat down carefully. Terrified, excited, completely unprepared. She looked up. What if I'm not good at this? What if I can't handle running the operation and being a mother? What if you can? What if you teach your child everything you've learned about courage and building things that matter? Margaret smiled. You'll figure it out. You always do. Telling Luke was harder than Clara expected. They were reviewing contracts when she finally worked up the nerve. I need to tell you something. He looked up, immediately concerned. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think so. But it's going to change things. She took a breath. I'm pregnant. Luke went very still. Then a smile spread across his face, genuine and amazed. You're sure? Margaret's sure. I'm still processing. He came around the desk, pulling her up and spinning her around before setting her down gently. This is good. This is really good. Clara, we're going to have a family. We already have a family. 43 workers, 1 cook, 1 housekeeper, and a fiddle-playing stable boy. A larger family, then. He kept his hands on her waist, his expression shifting to concern. Are you happy about this? Clara considered it honestly. I'm scared. But yes, I'm happy. I want to build this future with you. All of it. The baby was born in February, during a snowstorm that sealed the valley for 3 days. Margaret served as a midwife, having delivered more babies than any doctor Clara could have summoned. Luke paced the hallway outside their bedroom, driving Cook to distraction. When it was over, Clara held her daughter, tiny, red-faced, absolutely perfect, and felt the last piece of her old life finally let go. She wasn't Clara Bennett anymore, the poor girl from Red Hollow who'd married for survival. She was Clara Grayson, partner in Winter Ridge Timber, mother to this small person who would grow up knowing the valley and the forest and the importance of building things that lasted. They named her Elizabeth after Clara's mother, Eleanor Beth Grayson, if you wanted to be formal about it, though Clara never called her anything but Beth. The workers threw another celebration, this one quieter but no less heartfelt. Hanson carved a wooden bear as a gift. Peterson awkwardly offered to teach her to climb trees when she was older. Jamie announced he'd protect her from all dangers, which was ridiculous but touching. Luke was a disaster as a new father, anxious about every tiny sound, convinced Beth would break if held wrong. But he was also devoted in a way that made Clara's heart ache. He built a cradle from valley pine with his own hands, each joint perfect, each surface smooth enough that nothing could snag delicate skin. My father built one for me, he explained, running his hand over the wood. It's tradition, building something beautiful for something precious. Clara watched him with their daughter. This man who'd started as a stranger and become everything that mattered and understood what her mother had meant in that journal entry. Sometimes you chose the unknown because staying with the known would kill you slowly. Sometimes you were brave not because you weren't afraid, but because the fear of staying still was worse than the fear of moving forward. 5 years later, Clara stood on the same overlook where she'd first seen the valley, watching Beth chase butterflies through the meadow grass. The estate had expanded. More buildings, more workers, a small school they'd built for the few families who'd settled in the valley. The forest was healthier than ever, managed carefully and sustainably. Eleanor had died the previous winter, leaving her remaining investments to a charitable foundation that ironically ended up supporting conservation efforts. Victoria had divorced Brennan and remarried someone else, sending a brief note of congratulation when Beth was born. The governor had appointed Clara to an advisory committee on rural economic development. She traveled to Denver twice a year now, Beth staying with Margaret, and found she could navigate that world without fear. She'd earned her place there through work and honesty, not through pretending to be something she wasn't. Luke joined her on the overlook, his hair showing gray at the temples now. Peterson wants to retire next year, says he's getting too old for the work. He's 53. That's not old. It is when you've been doing timber work since you were 12. Luke leaned against the railing. I'm thinking of offering the position to Hanson. He's got the experience, and the men respect him. He'd be good, though Jamie might be disappointed. Jamie's 22 and still learning. Give him a few more years. Luke pulled Clara close. We've built something good here. We have. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd said no? Back in Red Hollow, when I made that offer? Clara thought about it. Sometimes. I'd probably still be there working for Henderson or someone like him. My father would have died in a public poorhouse instead of his own home. I'd have survived, I suppose, but I wouldn't have lived. What's the difference? Living means building something that matters. Surviving is just not dying. She looked at Beth, who'd found a stick and was sword-fighting invisible enemies. I want her to understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose the unknown over the familiar, that you can remake yourself into someone you're proud to be, even if it's terrifying. Luke was quiet for a moment. She'll understand. She has you for a mother. They walked back toward the house together, Beth running ahead with her stick sword, chattering about dragons and battles. The valley spread around them, protected and productive, a testament to choosing sustainability over extraction, people over profit, the long view over the quick win. Clara had learned many things in the years since leaving Red Hollow. How to run a business, how to navigate society politics, how to be a wife and mother and leader all at once. But the most important lesson had come from her father's last message. Live the life you've chosen without looking back. She'd chosen Luke and the mountains and the hard work of building something meaningful. She'd chosen to be brave when being safe was impossible. She'd chosen partnership over security, growth over stagnation, the terrifying possibility of success over the safe certainty of failure. And standing here now, watching her daughter play in the meadow while her husband discussed the future beside her, Clara understood that every impossible choice had been worth it. Not because everything had worked out perfectly, it hadn't, but because she'd faced the hardships and the triumphs as herself, fully present and fully alive. That night, after Beth was asleep and the house had settled into its familiar creaks and sighs, Clara found Luke in the study. He was reviewing next year's contracts, the same work that never truly ended. Come to bed, she said. In a minute. I just need to... Luke. She took the papers from his hands. It'll be there tomorrow. Come to bed. He smiled, following her upstairs. Their bedroom window looked out over the valley, the same view Sarah had loved but which Clara had made her own. The mountains stood silent in the moonlight. The river whispered below. The forest waited, patient and enduring. Clara had been terrified of this place once. Terrified of isolation and silence and the crushing weight of living up to a dead woman's memory. But she'd learned that fear was just another kind of wilderness to navigate. You didn't conquer it. You just kept walking through it until you found yourself on the other side, stronger than you'd been before. She'd walked into Winter Ridge as a desperate girl with no options. She'd become its queen not through marriage but through choice. The choice to stay when leaving would have been easier, to learn when ignorance was safer, to fight when surrender would have been understandable. That was the real story, Clara thought as she settled into bed beside Luke. Not the fairy tale of a poor girl who married rich, but the harder, truer story of a woman who found courage she didn't know she had and built a life that mattered. "I love you," Luke murmured in the darkness. "I know," Clara said. "I love you too." Outside, the valley slept. Inside, two people who'd found each other through desperation and transformed it into devotion rested easy, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new choices. But whatever came, they would face it together. And that, in the end, was all the happy ending anyone really needed.